Hi, good morning, everyone. We're going to hang in there for a moment or two until we get the rest of the folks into the meeting. Okay, looks like we are probably good to go. This is Julie LaRock, and I'd like to welcome you all to the August 11th Technical Oversight Committee. I've got a bunch of papers right in front of my phone here, so I apologize for the paper shuffling you may hear. Normally in the auditorium, we kind of introduce everybody, and that's a little difficult here, so I will simply let all of you who are on the line know that we have all of our TOC reps here. We have Mr. Barquette, and we do have a number of technical staff. In addition to, it looks like maybe 30 or more public attendees, so we're really glad to have you guys here this morning. I'm going to go over a few reminders and announcements while we're waiting for everybody else to chime into the meeting, and then we can get started. And among other things, I'm going to actually tell you live what I see on the website. So first of all, we are holding this meeting online, so please forgive those differences that we're used to when we have the meeting in the auditorium. If you're on your phone, you have a couple of ways to mute and unmute yourself, perhaps. So first of all, on your screen, you will see a mute or unmute myself button somewhere, lower left, or depending on how you're viewing the meeting, you may see it elsewhere. If you are a member of the public and I call on you, you're going to need to toggle yourself on and off of your mute. If you don't have a mute button, you're going to use *6 on your phone. If you aren't able to use your PC to raise your hand, for example, you're going to use *9 to raise your hand, and we'll call on you, and Devon will unmute you so you can speak. This is the best way we have to kind of keep things going. If you do raise your hand as an attendee and we don't know who you are, I'll call out the last 4 digits of your phone number just so you're aware of that also. That's a little nuance that we've started doing to make things a little bit easier. So please make sure you've only got one audio active in your area, especially if you're going to speak, so that we don't have feedback. We are going to take a vote, maybe, on a couple of items, and I'll talk about the agenda in a minute, but we'll take public comment about the specific item before we vote, if we vote on anything. And then all the other public comments we'll take at the end of the meeting. We're not going to be able to receive written public comments here today, so just kind of keep that in mind. But you can certainly, if you're an attendee or one of the presenters here, obviously you can make comments using Zoom. I think I mentioned the raise hand feature. That would really help us a lot. Typically, if we unmute you, there might be a moment or so before the audio engages, so please understand that. Zoom also has a chat feature, and I did want to let you all know the only reason we're planning to use the chat today is if you have a technical difficulty. So if you're having some sort of technical difficulty, by all means, let us know through chat. Lisette DeCastro will help us deal with that. As many of you are aware, we don't typically engage in a huge amount of conversation on public comments, but obviously, you guys have some important information you'd like us to have, so we will do our best to either respond after the meeting or get back to you. We're going to take action items for the next meeting at the end of the meeting today, if we have any. And let me talk about the agenda for a moment. and then I'll let you know what all is on the website. So you guys hopefully all have the agenda. I've been asked for a couple of clarifications on the agenda in the last couple of days. So rather than modify the agenda, I will simply clarify now. Items 3B, C, and 4 both have little asterisks next to them, and those are items where we may take a action or vote. It dawned on me this morning, I have not done a statistical analysis, so we put these asterisks on here, and I don't know how many times we actually end up voting on something, but they're there in case we choose to do that. The other slight modification I'm aware of on the agenda is Donato is making a presentation under item 3B, and he's actually split that into 2 separate presentations so that we could have some discussion in between those 2. And do we have any other, oh, and also for item 4, where we're talking about the Appendix A subteam update, that's where we would come back and indicate that we followed up with our principals about the equations in Appendix A and whether or not we're all agreeable to what was discussed at the last TOC meeting. Does anybody else have any agenda modifications or changes? Hopefully that clarifies everything for folks. I see a couple of hands raised from the public. Let me go back to our panelist list here for a sec. Okay. Brooks Moore, did you have a agenda comment or modification? Not hearing anything. We've got 3 folks who are attendees that have their hands raised. Hopefully we'll get to you guys, I guess, when, oh, somebody put their hand down. All right, yay. I guess we got to you. Brooks, did you have anything that you needed to bring up here? I don't know if we've unmuted you or not. Okay, hopefully you'll get back to us. All right, next is what the heck do we have out on the website? So we have, as usual, a huge amount of information out on the webpage. If you go to the main TOC webpage, at the moment we have posted the compliance tables through March of 2020. So we have the Refuge compliance table, a provisional Shark River Slough tracking report, sorry. We've got the QA reports for the first quarter of 2020, which is through March, and the settlement agreement report document, which John Madden will be briefing us on using his PowerPoint slides. And then if you go to the read-aheads for the meeting, you will see, in no particular order, we've got the direction that the TOC received back in 2016 from the principals that we agreed to in terms of how we deal with exceedances. You'll see for agenda item number 4, there's a couple of documents that John Madden very kindly prepared for us so that we could show you guys more clearly what we're talking about. One of them is Method 3, the equation for Taylor, Slough, and coastal basins that we were to come back and discuss, and also Method 1.5 for Shark River Slough. We've got 2 items from Donato, both noted as agenda items 3B. So there's a exploration number 1, and I believe we'll follow with a little discussion in exploration number 2. There's a rainfall item for agenda item 3A is out there, which was a follow-up from the last meeting. Speaking of the last meeting, the draft notes are out there for you. Also, the presentation you're going to see from John Madden on the January through March 2020 data. And we've reposted an item that we had last time just to make sure we're being complete for everyone. This is a pros and cons related to the different compliance equations for Appendix A that we discussed. So do I have any other kind of questions or anything on the agenda that we need to talk about before we really get going here? Okay. I know we have one district person we're trying to get you an invite out so that we can mute and unmute you more easily, I guess I'll put it that way. All righty, so let's move on to approving the meeting summary from the last meeting. We did get one comment from a rep that we had a typo in there, so we fixed that already. Do I have any other comments or items related to the notes from the last meeting? And I'm hearing silence. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Hey, Julie, this is Frank. I don't have any comments or additional questions. It looks like you guys corrected that error that I mentioned earlier. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Frank. How about Lori, Donato, Dan? Do you guys have anything on the meeting notes, or are they okay?
They're okay by me, Julie.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, this is Dan Crawford. Julie, it's okay by me as well.
This is they're okay with me. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, you guys. So the meeting notes are good as is, and I'm going to shuffle because I got to refer back to them in a little while, I'm sure. All right. Great. Thanks a lot, you guys. Our next agenda item is to listen to John Madden and take a look at the information from the January through March of 2020, the first quarter of 2020 settlement agreement report. So John, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I will do that. I know Kim had the PowerPoint. Kim, if you just, okay. I may share my screen. Kim, if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll share the PowerPoint, and that'll be easier because I have the PowerPoint presentation. Very good. Okay, how do we look?
Looking good.
It looks good, John.
Okay, excellent. So as Julie mentioned, your task right now is to listen to me. We'll try to be as interesting as possible, though it's probably a good thing that the results for this quarter are relatively boring. Other than we can, get excited about some low phosphorus numbers, but nothing too exciting to talk about. I'm reporting through March of 2020, so we're adding reporting out on the quarterly report that's posted on the website, and in the read aheads, the January through March period for the refuge, and we have provisional data for Shark River Slough, as 12 flows are provisional, and right now we're reporting through half of the federal water year. So these results, these 12-month results ending in March, include the second half of water year 19 and the first half of water year 20, just to give you a little perspective. So right now we're tracking the Shark River Slough inflows on a provisional basis and tracking the inflows to Taylor Slough and coastal basins halfway through our upcoming water year 2020. And as we can see, starting at the top, the refuge results are for the geometric means are consistently below the long-term levels by quite a bit in this period. The stages were high enough in the marsh to enable us to collect at all 14 stations. In Shark River Slough, again, just giving an overall summary here, and then I'll cover in more detail later. The 12 months ending in January, February, and March, the TP flow weighted means trended in the right direction. They're going down from 10.4 with method 1 and 9.5 with method 2 down to 10 and 9.2. And the long-term limits, since there was lower flow, they ended up going up. So went up to 10.1 and 9.5. So at this point, through the 12 months through March, the long-term long-term limit is higher than the TP flow weighted mean. I should have said the other way around. I'm getting confused on the heading. So the flow weighted means are lower than the long-term limit. And also we've seen the observed percent of, here we go, percent observed sampling is now lower than the guideline, and we're flipped the other way earlier. So trending in the right direction for Shark River Slough. Taylor Slough coastal basins, consistent results throughout this period. Of course, the long-term limit is fixed at 11, and we're about less than half of that number for all methods. And our observed number of sampling events greater than 10 part per billion is very low. So to go into a little more detail for the refuge, we show the 36-month period, and sorry, my version of PowerPoint isn't showing this shaded as it usually does, but below these lines are the monthly stage on the dates we go out there and collect. And for the refuge, the long-term level, the expectation for the phosphorus geomean is inverse to that. So as stages go up, the long-term level is lower. We see that pattern in this red line. And then our monthly sampling event geometric mean of those 14 or as many stations as we can collect are shown in the dots. And we can see, for really the last 2 years or more out of this 3-year period, we've been consistently below, with an average of all of those 36 months being 6.9 part per billion, just below the expectation of 7 in the consent decree. And taking that long-term level line and stretching it out to 0, we can just see the difference here, or the deviation between the long-term level, which again here is at 0, and where we actually collected. So on average, we're 2.7 parts per billion below the long-term level during this 36-month period. And we covered these months here that we're officially reporting out in the quarterly report. And then for our preliminary data outlook, it continues to look good. Stages did come down, and as we'd expect, the geometric mean concentrations did go up slightly, and the long-term levels, reflected that as well. So we stayed considerably below that long-term level during that period. And because the stages dropped, we weren't able to get all 14 stations, but we're back up to 12 as of July and looking at about 16.1, 16.2 for a stage in the refuge. Now switching over to Shark River Slough, again, the provisional data for the 12 months ending January, February, and March. We're seeing a decreasing trend in the flow area means and increasing trend in the limit. Percent of sampling events is just below the guideline. So we're still seeing half of that water year 19 that we're going to be discussing a little later as part of it. And we are showing the method 1 and the method 2 here. Just to clarify, we haven't started reporting out on anything different. This is consistent with what we've been doing for the last almost 2 years now. Just a reminder of where we are. Water year 19 was the most recent, just above our limit. And we've kind of had alternating results the last 4 years in that. Now looking at the structure flows in a 36-month period, pretty clearly you see 3 wet seasons here. And obviously varying magnitude. We're looking at the wet season associated with water year 19, 18, and 17. 17 being much wetter in general, and you can see even the distribution between the structures is a little bit different. We saw a lot of flow in water year 17 from those S12A and B. Well, actually, I'm sorry. A lot of this occurred after the end of the water year. So September being here, we're not, so a lot of this flow actually happened within water year 18. It's kind of like we had both of these highest humps here within water year 18. And you see more flow here from 333. The colors are a little odd on this screen, S12D, C, B, and A. We do see increased flow through 356 pump station, and this is showing those method, this is just all the structure flow. So everything that went through 356 is depicted on this chart. A little more clearly, you can see those differences in magnitude between one wet season and the next on this, with S12A being at the top, B, C, and D. And then S333, more consistent for flows. A subsequent plot will show how much of this 333 flow actually went to Shark River Slough versus around the corner through 334, and that's a little bit telling. Obviously, we see a lot more 356 flow here in the more recent period, and in water year 19 going into water year 20. This is the plot that shows the inflows and outflows from that L29 segment between 333 and 334. The blue, where most of the flow is occurring, is what's passing the 333 structure, but whatever's below this orange line here is not counting towards the Shark River Slough compliance, as that's going through the other end of 334 of the L29 canal. And then you can see the relative magnitude of 356 inflows from the east pumping into the L29 as well. So for the recent period, since November, pretty much all the flow that has passed 333 has gone to around 334. There are some, certain days that you'll see that there's minimum flow, but basically it's for this period, there were not deliveries to Northeast Shark River Slough at all. Again, see that flow pattern here. This is just showing the days where we have compliance collection, and there are some water quality points showing out here on the right end. And again, this is ending in March, so, but the flows associated with that are so very small, they're not going to be significant in the overall compliance. We see those periods where in between the wet seasons where we had some concentrations increase, but again, not significantly associated with that much flow. And then here's the cumulative results and what we're reporting now as of the end of March. Again, even these water quality points here didn't have too much influence on the overall flow aid mean, since there wasn't much flow. But this is where we are for the 12 months ending March, right around 10 at this point in time. Taylor Slough and coastal basins, we report flow. It doesn't directly influence the limit. The long-term limit is fixed at 11, and very consistent results. I'll show you all the data points, and the three methods we're continuing to discuss today. And obviously method 3 is showing the lowest results that incorporates the downstream site 328, which is a direct discharge into Everglades National Park downstream of 332D. History, we are well below that long-term limit of 11. And the relative inflows for the last 36 months for 332D in the light blue, S18C in the dark blue, and G737 in yellow. And the other methods contemplate flows, the details of what happens with that flow downstream of 332D. So those are shown on a subsequent slide for the C111 detention basin. Although it appears there's a shift as a reduction in magnitude at G737 from the earlier periods, it's really the method of monitoring. We're at this point in time there's a brand new structure. We didn't have flow monitoring set up, so we're using S200 flows, the upstream site. So this is just a refinement in the monitoring, not really a shift in the magnitude. It's just a lot of this water ends up working towards that hydraulic ridge and are lost to seepage and evapotranspiration before it actually turns into surface water runoff into the park. S18C, we had in the last few years a few events and wet seasons. Not too much this last year for huge freshwater flows in that direction, but consistent deliveries. And 332D, kind of similar, just the way the hydrologic patterns and the operation have worked out. 328 is the structure downstream of 332D, which further conveys those surface water discharges into the park, north of Taylor Slough, upstream of Taylor Slough. And DX1 is the structure that just flows to the adjacent detention area to the north and not directly surface water into the park. So the blue is on this chart is what is being pumped 332D into the C111 detention area. Again, the purple or fuchsia was passed into the adjacent detention area to the north, and the green is the portion of the 332D flows that were passed through the 328. The fate of the rest of this is either flowing via surface water discharge south through the detention area, berm B3, and out to Taylor Slough, or some of it translates to seepage, either east or west, or evapotranspiration. Concentrations along this are very consistent. We did have a couple of those tropical events that we had huge flows at S18C and associated concentration spikes. Those are outside our 12-month window at this point in time. So we're seeing, as soon as those left that 12-month window, we're pretty consistent, right around between 5 and 5.5 parts per billion for the 12-month averages. So with that, I'll open it up to TOC rep questions or any technical staff. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody have comments or questions for John? Not seeing any hands raised or mics unmuted, so I will assume not. And before we go on to the next agenda item, I did want to mention several of us were on the meeting ahead of the whole crowd joining, and I did fail to let everybody know that Mr. Barquette is also on the line. So we do have all the TOC reps and Mr. Barquette present this morning. And thank you to the individual who alerted me to that. I appreciate it. Okay, our next agenda item is Shark River Slough exceedance for federal water year 2019. We had 4 action items associated with this particular agenda item. And I've just kind of taken a look at the meeting notes. The first one was Donato's, and he'll be doing his during his presentation. The next one is John Madden, who will have give us his information. Dan, you had an action item also about stages farther north, so I don't know if you were going to update us on that. And then the other action item was all of us were supposed to look into additional information about the exceedance and considering Appendix C of the consent decree and what potential remedies could be taken. So I just want to remind folks of the action items. We can launch into yours, John. John was going to rank water year 19 into the longer period of record for conservation 3A rainfall and give us some specifics about how this is calculated and which gauges it includes. So John, do you have that information for us, please?
Sure. I need 1 second to get that file up here.
I might have the file. I'm just not sure which one it is.
The WCA 3A rain, but I can bring it up.
Yeah, it's supplemental federal water year 19 rainfall estimates at the top.
Okay.
Don't worry about it, Kim. I'll have it here in 2 seconds. Okay, I think I just need to zoom in here a little bit, maybe. Julie, can you see my screen? Does
Yeah,
it look
sure.
okay?
Looks good. Thanks.
All right. I don't have too much detail. There was, a lot of discussion of the rainfall and how it's computed, and depending on how you look at things, but I did pull up a map, and hopefully this makes sense to folks. But this green, well, you see the Lake Okeechobee here. This green area is the EAA and some S4 associated basins. So the rain area that I reported on is, you know, this district standard of what the operations use to look at rainfall. Maybe for different operations plans there are slight deviations, but this includes the portion of Big Cypress National Preserve Mullet Slough that drains into 3A. So there are several sites that we use all or a portion of these polygons that are drawn on here. So when just so you know, when I'm pulling numbers and showing the chart, that's what we're talking about. And for the federal water years, which are from October 1st through September 30th, water year 19 rainfall in that area was 44.1. Of course, it varied within that area, and there are areas outside that contribute to that overall flow. But just looking in general, and that ranked 49th out of 62 years. So it was on the lower end of rainfall, but and that dates back to 1958. Shown here, you can see the variability. And then I talked about where it was, and then the timing of the rainfall of that 44 inches is displayed. And this is a handout that's available on the website as well. We can see that there was some intense rainfall towards the end of January, but mainly that area started in May, and then again June there were a few rushes, and then August. So are there any questions related to that, or you want to go through all the different information that was brought back and then discuss it collectively? That's up to you, I guess, guys.
It might be simpler if somebody has a question on this particular piece to ask it now.
The only comment
this is John Barquette. I spent some time trying to figure out the last slide on this here, these in polygons. I didn't quite understand. I understood the first two slides, but I didn't quite understand what you were trying to show with this spider web of polygons.
And I will share with everyone that when we talk about rainfall areas at the district, it can be a little confusing. They're not based on county lines or necessarily some of the geographic lines that most of us associate with. And so, John, you can speak a little more, John Madden, about this polygon here.
Right. The point of showing this was to clarify for anyone who really wanted to dive into the details of which sites are used. Fortunately, it's not as readable as I thought it was, but WCA3APX. These are the particular sites, and it is weighted based on this peach colored area. That's what the rainfall is. So sometimes we talk about it as a high rainfall year in general for the district, or for the coastal areas in St. Lucie, but this data is very specific to this basin.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't understand how the legend, maybe it was just a difficulty in interpreting the legend. Some of these acronyms I didn't understand, and while I understood most of the I mean, it's labeled rain forecast areas. So that's what was confusing me. Is this showing something into the future, or is this based on historical information? I assume if you were using these in polygons, you had data points that were real, but.
Mr. Burkett, these are the standard rainfall areas that we use at our agency, whether the meteorologists are trying to help us predict future rainfall, or in the case of the folks in my group, we again use these rainfall areas to report what has historically occurred as well. And I think somebody's going to have to correct me if I'm wrong. On the left-hand side where it says rain gauge type, that's the type of equipment that's being used. And on the right, even though it says rain forecast areas, I've also seen that referred to as rainfall areas. And I know I got quite an education when I thought the Palm Beach rainfall area was Palm Beach County, and it is not actually. So these are the areas that the meteorologists use in determining rainfall, whether it's trying to help us predict what's going to happen in the future so we can get the system ready, or in looking at it historically. So these are district standards that we've used since way before my time. I don't know if that helps.
Well, but yeah, I'm trying to understand how it relates to Shark River Slough and the issue that we're discussing. So take the green area right below Lake Okeechobee. What is that telling us?
On the map here, it's actually just showing you the area, and the dots are the rain gauges that are out there. But for the action item that John was asked to look at was actually to look at the Conservation Area 3A rainfall specifically, which is that peachy kind of color. You see his cursor kind of going over right now. So that's that area would indicate what the rainfall was that fell on Conservation Area 3.
And that's more, peach means more rather than less?
This map doesn't actually indicate intensity or amount of rainfall. It's simply letting folks know how the rainfall amounts were determined, or what was used to determine the rainfall amount. So actually, I am not going to lie, I ended up with an extra question out of this myself, but John was asked to rank water year 19 for Conservation Area 3 rainfall, which is what he did here. And so the map simply indicates which gauges are used for that, but it also shows the rest of the district. And it's interesting you ask about the one area south of the lake, because I now wonder how maybe some of the rainfall was in water year 19 in some of these other areas that feed into Conservation Area 3, but that wasn't something we really discussed in much detail or asked about at the last meeting.
That's actually where I was headed. That's actually where I was headed, to try to figure out what was moving in. But in any event, it was a beautiful map. I credit you for the kaleidoscope. I just didn't quite understand how it related to the first two slides.
It's simply data source.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. I didn't mean to take up so much time. It was just a little confusing.
We want to make sure everybody's questions are answered here, because we've got a lot of information that we all need to digest. So I want to be sure everybody has it digested.
Yeah, it was an existing map that depicts what we needed. I can't take credit for creating it. And I didn't realize, yes, the rain forecast areas, I wasn't focusing on that, but that could be confusing. So we're showing, the first two show the historical data, and this just simply trying to depict the kind of the calculation methodology and what gauges are used to formulate those, to establish those historic rainfall.
And Stuart, did you have something you wanted to add, or do we maybe have this covered?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think what John is presenting was a logical sequence, and that was from the last meeting, I believe. And which he showed a number of charts on concentrations that were from the upstream. And all of this is couched in the context of trying to determine what are the causative factors that might be associated with the exceedance. So this has been done in a piecemeal approach. So from the last meeting, when looking at causation, those presentations that John had provided were concentration based, showing the upstream, trying to determine whether or not there was any upstream contribution to the exceedances. And, that debate is amongst the TOC members to have that conversation. But the next logical step was, okay, what other causative factors might be attributed to the exceedance if you were to look beyond the upstream concentration. So when you look at natural extraordinary phenomena, were there rainfall events that would have occurred in the water conservation area that could have had an impact on stages, for instance? So this is just background information that John had put together based on the conversations from the previous meeting to look at whether or not the rainfall patterns that would fall in 3A and the water level rise, the volume of water that could be contributed to Shark River Slough associated with an exceedance, if there's something there. So that's what this presentation is. And the way John put it together also, like Julie had said, is this is all based on district publications and how the information is put together for all these different rainfall sites. It's a pretty standard technique, and it's also used in the regulatory process, all those what they're called Thiessen polygons, and how you take different rainfall stations and figure out geographic average rainfall over a certain area. That's also used on our regulatory side in permits. So it's all pretty standard, but that's the context of this is when you're evaluating extraordinary natural phenomenon, is there something here in the rainfall, and how do you couple that with the information that was available from upstream in terms of concentrations? So I just want to add that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this piece? And we can certainly, when we start doing more discussion, if we need to loop back, we can. I'm just trying to.
Julie, this is Jed Redwine. The only thing I would say that is notable on this that I wanted to point out is just the relatively low amount of rainfall that occurred in September of 2019.
Okay, great, thank you. And Jed, you're with the park, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, any other comments, questions from reps or technical staff at this point?
This is Donato. I'll give a comment. Actually, just want to thank John for taking the time to expand the analysis on the rainfall to put it in more of a context. At the last meeting, we were basically told that it was the water year 2019 was the third lowest, I think since 2007, water year 2007 or something like that. So he took and expanded that because rainfall doesn't really have the limitations of us managing it and changing operations to it. So putting it in a broader context really actually helps to understand the story. And I'll chime on that again in my presentation. So thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else right now? Okay. All right. Dan, I need to check with you before we go on to Donato's presentation. We decided last time that you'd provide information about whether stages farther north in the L67A exhibited the same trends as at S333. Again, trying to evaluate the characterization of whether it was an extraordinarily dry year. And I think we've already mentioned, but I'll reiterate, at the last meeting, there was a statement that the S333 headwater stage was the lowest on record over the year. And I know we're going to see that for sure in Donato's presentation. Is your information kind of incorporated in Donato's already, Dan?
Hey, Julie. Yes, this is Dan Crawford. The gist of my comment last time was that John had included some bullet points that said, that the canal stage at 333 was the lowest maximum stage going back to water year 2008 and the lowest flow weighted mean average stage. So just because the Corps had started operations to under the increment 2 field test to more aggressively move water into Northeast Shark River Slough, also in late water year 18 and beginning of water year 19. I just wanted to confirm that those were not locally isolated stage levels that were observed at 3.3. So I did do some additional checks looking at the Eden 8 gauge, which is about 8 miles upstream, as well as the Site 65 station, and confirmed I have no issue with the way that John characterized the 3.3 stages. It's not a local, the stages are not local effects at 3.3 due to increased deliveries into Eastern Shark River Slough. It is accurately characterized in his presentation as kind of a regional trend that covers the southern half of Conservation Area 3A. So I answered my own question, and I don't feel like there's any supplemental information to add to what John had provided back in May. Over.
Okay, great. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. It's good that you were able to take a look at that. I know we take on action items sometimes, and then we start looking at the data and we realize there really isn't anything, there's not a story every time. So, all right, great. Thank you. So the other action item that Donato was going to do, I will introduce Donato here. He does have 2 presentations. I believe the idea was to have some discussion between the 2 presentations. And I just want to say up front, Donato, thank you very much. You put a significant effort into this, and we really appreciate all the information you're going to be showing us. So Donato, it's all yours.
Okay. All right, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, sir. And you probably want to go to full presentation mode. There you go. That's great. Thank you.
Right, so there's a minor lag. So Julie, thank you for the introduction, and it's very generous given all of the chaos and confusion I've caused you over the last week or so. So thanks for that positive enforcement. I do want to mention that I do have, in addition to Bill Walker and Bob Cadlick, my consultants for this project. I also have Bob Johnson and Jed Redwine here as panelists today. So once we get into the discussions, we might lean on them for some of their information and knowledge. So jumping into the presentation, I'm going to be looking at compliance this year for water year 2019. I'm going to heavily focus on a stage threshold that we developed through the combined operation plan for the adaptive management project portion of that COP. And that threshold is 9.2 feet at the headwater of S333. So I'll be talking about that through most of this presentation. Just bringing the main points up to the front. My main findings here, the water year 2019 compliance. Water year 2019 started off pretty low, and as John and the discussion we just had, we had some of the lower water levels for the year, particularly on the maximum side of those water levels. Going back to 2006, we started pretty low. There were a few other years that started similarly at that low level, but water year 2019 never actually exceeded 9.65 feet at the headwater of S333, while those other 2 years, they went above 10 feet, and we had the opportunity to have much lower concentrations delivered during those higher stage periods. One thing that I found here was that more than 50% of the water that we delivered through S333 in water year 2019, it occurred when we were below 9.2 foot. And what we know about the 9.2 foot stage threshold is that when we're below the 9.2, we're generally gonna have concentrations that exceed 10 parts per billion. And we rarely see any that come below that 8 part per billion. And I'll demonstrate that shortly. Water levels during the dry to wet season transition period, which I'm defining as April through July, they were low, and they were below the 9.2 feet, and actually carried out all the way through August below 9.2 feet. We delivered all of those concentrations. Most of that flow is counted in the compliance. Substantial water was delivered to Northeast Shark River Slough during this transition period. In past years, we would be sending a large fraction of that water to South Dade, so routing it around through SD34, and that would not be going to Northeast Shark River Slough, thus it would not have been incorporated into compliance. But this year we incorporated them. And the concentrations were moderately above 10 parts per billion during this time, so they all counted and helped lead us to that exceedance of the long-term limit. Like I said, this is going to be kind of focused on the operations that we were dealing with through this year. So I wanted to give us a different perspective of looking at the phosphorus. Normally we look at it as a time series with bar plots, flow rate mean concentrations on the y-axis. This time I wanted to look at the flow as it's distributed, the concentrations as they're distributed over the flow. So you see here on our y-axis, we have concentrations represented on the y-axis and the flows in 1,000 acre feet on our x-axis. These black dots and red dots represent the water year flow rate and mean concentrations that would be compared to the long-term limits. And you can see the red dots, these are our exceedance years, and all 4 of those have happened in recent years since 2012. If you squint and ignore this dot down here, that's just below 8 part per billion, where we're way lower than 500,000 acre feet. Just look at these other dots, you can see that we do have a downward pattern as we increase flow. And then once you cross this vertical line that's labeled 1061,000 acre feet, you can see we have pure black dots. All of these are in compliance. This dashed gray line represents the 8 part per billion target that's established in the Appendix A for water delivered to Shark River Slough. You can see we're well below that. We're at the calculated target of 7.6 in most of these cases. One of them is 7.7. Another thing I want to point out, so the point here is that when we're above 1061, we're seeing ourselves in compliance consistently. And this is even in the wake of our transition to the Everglades Restoration Transition Plan, which pushed us to reduce water levels in Conservation Area 3A by ½ a foot. And we knew back then, back in 2010, when we were doing that evaluation, that we knew this inverse relationship between stage and concentrations existed. And we were seeing slight increase in exceedances. That has bared out during ERTP, so we can see those frequency of exceedances has increased. However, the way to counter that seems to send more water. Getting us above 1061 seems to bring us into compliance. We do have this one red dot here when we get close to 1061. This is water year 2017, and we've already ruled that as extraordinary natural phenomenon for that rain event that happened in that June and spiked our concentration up to 87 parts per billion. So this one is an anomaly, but the rest of this seems like this is the general pattern that we can expect as we go forward and have more flow coming into the system above 1061,000 acre feet. I can go a little further back in time. So all of this is going back to water year 2006. I go back to water year 2005, and I do have one event where the concentration was higher than this, was an exceedance, and we were above the 1061. However, we have seen substantial downward trends in concentrations through most of our structures, and it seems like that pattern is bearing itself out in our compliance in most recent years. And then the other thing I'll mention is most of these events here have happened in the last few years when we were getting these flows increase substantially, and that seems to be related heavily to the relaxation of the G3273 constraint we had in Northeast Shark River Slough, which kind of limited a lot of our flow. So relaxing that constraint seems to have allowed a lot more flow to come through the system. So some basic observation, and I call it an observation, but in reality, this is what's embedded in the rainfall plan for delivering water to Northeast Shark River Slough. And it's desirably embedded in that plan because we want more water going to Northeast Shark River Slough. But what pops out is that, and I'll show you on the next 2 slides, is that we are heavily dependent on S333 when we're in this dry to wet season transition. And generally that structure has the highest concentrations relative to the upstream structures. And that was one of my action items from the last meeting, was to compare concentration between the 333 and other structures. So we'll see that here. So here I'm presenting just the total phosphorus concentrations only when the structures are flowing. And in each one of these panels, each of these figures, you can see that S333 structure is listed in each one of them, and that's that open circle, and it's the black. On each of the other panels, I have S12A, S12B represented, S12C and D on the top right panel, S356, 152 down here on the bottom left panel, and then 355A and B on the bottom right panel. We see very few samples over here for the 355s. Again, that structure rarely flows. So even on my next slide, when you do see more concentrations, you can just ignore it because that's a system that is pretty much drying and re-wetting, but never actually moving the phosphorus out. So when we look at the S333 concentrations and the other structures, you can see the pattern that jumps out immediately is that transition period, April through July. You can see that the structure that is mostly being used is the S333. You can see here that S12D did have an event back in 2017 where it was flowing a little bit, and then the similar for S356. But for the most part, we are heavily dependent on S333 during this transition period. We can include all of the concentrations. So under all of the conditions, now we can get a better picture of what the magnitudes of the peaks are for each of these structures relative to S333. S12A tends to collect samples on a weekly basis, regardless if it's flowing or not. So it gives you a good picture of what's going on. And you can see the spikes here in this top left panel. S333 is still sitting on top of those, except for this most recent year. For the rest of these panels, you can see the cases that S333 stands well above concentrations observed at the other structures, particularly upstream down on the L67A, where we have S152 structure, similarly to the far east at the S356. And like I described earlier, the 355A and B, they don't flow, so these concentrations are expected to be pretty high because they're not moving out. Mentioned that I would discuss why the 9.2 foot threshold was relevant. So I presented here two panels. The left panel, which is all of the concentrations being collected, so under all conditions of flow. So TP is represented on the y-axis, stage on the x-axis. The difference between these two figures is the one on the right is only flowing conditions. And you can clearly see that the distribution looks pretty much the same. The only difference is that it's thinned out on the panel on the right where it's only flow conditions. Looking at this vertical line, the vertical dashed line, that represents, the one on the right represents 9.2 foot. And then looking across, we have a line that I established here that's 8 parts per billion, and that's the concentrations. So if we look at just when we go below 9.2 feet, you can see there are very few sample events that are occurring when concentrations are below 8 part per billion and stage was less than 9.2 feet. That case gets even worse when we're below 8.5 feet. So what I really wanted to do is understand what were the flow dynamics happening for water year 2019 with respect to the stage threshold. So I looked across the period of record, going back to water year 2006. I just summed up the total flows that were delivered in each water year above and below the 9.2 feet. You can see here the blue panel, the blue bars on the top panel represent flows delivered when we're above 9.2 feet, and then the burgundy represents when we're less than 9.2 feet. But for the most part, the flows delivered when we're lower than 9.2 feet are much lower than what's happening when we're delivering above 9.2 feet. Generally less than 38% of the flows are delivered when we're below 9.2 feet. However, there were 3 years when we either exceeded or we were tied between the distributions of flow above and below. It's water year 2011, 2014, and then this most recent one, water year 2019, which had a distribution of flows when we were below 9.2 feet all the way up to 54%. Now, of these 3 years when we were having these similar type flows between the above and below deliveries of 9.2 feet, 2 of those were exceedance years, water year 14 and then water year 19. Both of them bared out to be exceedance years. You kind of expect water year 2011 to be an exceedance year as well. But that one was a severe drought. And I mentioned earlier in my update summary that we were sending a lot more water to South Dade back in the day. So this represents that here. So total phosphorus is represented. So I'm at this bottom panel on the left. I did skip a slide, so I'm on slide 10. So TP concentrations are on the TP and stage are represented on the y-axis, on the primary y-axis. On our secondary y-axis, we have flows, and then we have dates represented on the x-axis. This one is for water year 2011. Solid black line represents S333 headwater stage. The solid blue line represents the flows through the 333. The solid red line represents the flows through the 334, and the red dots in the background represents concentrations. And I'll point your attention to the scale over here for the concentrations, 10 up to 50 parts per billion. You can see when we're in this low stage portion of the water year of 2011, concentrations have jumped up above 25 parts per billion for the most part, all the way up to 50 parts per billion. But again, most of this water is being delivered to South Dade. So very little of this actually counted in compliance, so it didn't count against us. That's not the case when we look at water year 2019. One thing that jumps out at you when you look at water year 19 is that there's a lot more volatility in the flow through 333. We're spiking all the way up to 1200 CFS in various cases. And then even though the scale again for the TP is much lower than it was for the water year 2011, our highest concentration was only 31 parts per billion. And if you guys remember the exceedance we had in water year 2017, we could remove that spike of 87 part per billion that we had in June and the associated flow, and we got back into compliance. Doing that for water year 2009, removing this 31 part per billion did absolutely nothing to get us back into compliance. And I think that's associated with this low level, slightly higher concentration than the 8 part per billion we're supposed to be seeing going through 33. So again, we sent a lot of water during this period, so it wasn't balanced out with the water that would go out through 334. Stages again were below this 9.2 threshold for a substantial period. And a lot of this water counted into the compliance. Moving back to this top panel, I want you to see the stage distribution for water year 19 relative to a couple of other years. I did pick 2 years where we did not exceed compliance or we were in actual compliance. So water year 2018, you can see water year 2018, which is this blue dashed line, is starting well above 11 feet. Declines doesn't come much below the 9.2 feet for any amount of time. So we had really good high water levels and good concentrations coming out. So obviously we were in compliance that year. I just described water year 2011, which is the dashed gray line, and then water year 2014, which would be other exceedance, kind of looks a lot like water year 2019. But focusing in on water year 2019, like I said at the beginning, we never actually got above 9.65 feet. So that was our maximum stage for the year, and that was in early October. And we just started coming down slowly. But those rains that John showed you earlier, the distribution of those rains kept us from dipping down away like we would have in past years. Still, this red line represents the 9.2 feet. We stayed down below this 9.2 feet through the whole transition period and through much of August. And we delivered all those concentrations, so they were incorporated into compliance. I was asked to incorporate load under these type of load distributions for the 9.2 feet. And you can see this is how that's distributed here. Again, this is 333 structure. Most of the years delivering water under the 9.2 foot threshold was limited to 38% of the annual loads. Water year 2019 did not follow that pattern. We were all the way up to around 71% of the load for the whole year was delivered when water levels below 9.2 feet. I wanted to give you an idea of what the system actually looks like for the S333, what we're dealing with, because my real focus is here is it seems like there's an exaggerated pattern of spiking the S333. And we've been spending the last few years trying to understand that dynamic. So to that, I had the fortune of one of my colleagues, Dr. Troy Hill, who went out front of the S333 gate and using a GoPro, deployed that into the canal, and it allowed us the ability to see the canal floor. And as a result of this observation is that there's a thin layer of sediment coating this irregular surface, and you can see the irregularness of this surface by all these rocks that are sticking up, but you can also see this thin layer of sediment sitting down on here. And this, my understanding is the bulk density of this sediment is similar to that of water, so it's easily disturbed. So any type of turbulent events that can occur can obviously entrain this into the water column, and we'll capture that in our signals as we're collecting samples for concentrations here. So that can be exacerbated by the turbulence that we're experiencing at the structure. I have another colleague, Jed Redwine, who I mentioned earlier. Dr. Redwine went out to the structure as well, and he took some videos of the surface. And he's demonstrating the turbulence. And this type of turbulence that we're seeing in this structure is pretty common. It's been reported on and published that anytime we're at what people are calling a dog leg, or in our case, a 90-degree turn. So when we're coming down the L67A, we make a 90-degree turn into the S333 structure. Wherever we're having this type of confluence, there's a tendency to have substantial levels of turbulence established. We're definitely at this structure. This is a poignant example of that here. You see this vortex is forming here, and that's some styrofoam. If that was not styrofoam, you can imagine that that would have been pulled right under the water column. That type of turbulence radiating further upstream, you can expect that to incorporate or entrain more sediments on the canal floor. It's even a potential that that can be helping to pull or cause leaching of material from the embankments as well. John Madden has informed me that this is the location where we actually have the S333 auto sample collection. And then over here on the far end of this boardwalk is where they actually collect the grab samples. So if this turbulence is having some influence, it seems like there is a higher potential that that can be contributing higher concentrations that we see at the auto sampler at S333 relative to concentrations we see at 333, particularly when water levels are coming down and they get low. That's when we start to see that divide between the auto samplers and the grab samples. And it seems like it's related to this turbulence. So coupling this turbulence on the surface with what we saw on the canal floor, it seems like we're in a prime condition to suspend sediments and increase the loads of concentration going to the park that are captured and calculated. In addition to that information, we had, for the last few years, been working with Henry Bersenio at the FIU, and he's gone out and collected sediment cores upstream of the S333 along the L67A canal and then out on the L29 canal. Just simply his findings were that along the L67 canal, L67A canal, there's very little organic muck material. It's mostly sandy, fine-grained material, while in the L29 canal, there's organic sediments and it's pretty rich and dense. So I think a lot of the sediment that we were looking at in front of the S333 is probably coming a lot from this L29. So I want you to kind of keep that in your mind to help inform our next discussion after I close this one out. So in summary, the basic thing that we found was we started water year level low for water year 2019. Like I said, there were a few years when we were similarly low. Water year 08 and 16 represent some of those, but in each case we went above that 10-foot stage, and we got the benefit of much lower concentrations at that higher stage condition. We did not have that benefit in water year 2019, 9.65 feet, and we spent a substantial amount of time below 9.2 feet, delivering more than 50% of the water that year while we were below 9.2 feet. During that dry to wet season transition, all of those flows were delivered at below 9.2 feet. We didn't have the advantage of coming up above that threshold at any point at a time. And finally, when going forward, it's very likely that we're not going to be doing patterns that we saw in previous years where a lot of the water was just sent around, particularly during this dry to wet season transition period, we're not going to be having most of that water going around today. There will be some fraction that's sent there, and a lot more will be going to Northeast Shark River Slough, which is consistent with the park's objective to get more water in the Northeast Shark River Slough. But given that situation, we can see that there are some things that we can possibly do management-wise to help us improve the concentrations being delivered. So in this case, we've incorporated all of those concentrations and most of the flow associated with those concentrations during water year 19. And to me, that seems like a major driver of what's led us to the exceedance that we saw last year. With that, that'll be the end of my presentation, and I'm opening the floor for questions.
Thank you, Donato. And I certainly have some questions, but maybe we could go to the different agencies represented to get started here. So maybe Lori, did you have comments or questions or thoughts here on what Donato's presented?
Yeah, and thank you, Donato, for putting this all together. Hey, can you run back to slide number 3, please? And I just wanted to make sure everyone, I guess, is kind of getting your takeaway from this. So when you're saying the flow of 1,061, are you calculating that at all of the structures, like S12A, B, C, D, and all the 333, or is that just a total inflow into Northeast Shark River Slough, and what are the sources, I guess, is what I'm trying to clarify.
So this is just the compliance flows. So these are the S12s, S333, removing the 334 flows, and recently incorporating the 356. So it's all of the flows that we normally use in the compliance calculation for Shark River Slough.
Okay, and that's the total 1,000 acre feet going into Northeast Shark River Slough.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that that included all of the structures and not just like the 333.
Right, no, this is all of the structures, and it's for the total Shark River Slough, so not just limited to Northeast Shark River Slough.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that. All right, that's it, Julie, that's all I have.
Okay, what about you, Dan? Anything here? Oh, I see Bill Walker has his hand raised also. Do you want to comment or ask any questions, Dan, or should we go to Bill here? I'm not seeing Dan unmute himself. Bill Walker, you have your hand raised, and I know Donato already introduced you as part of his technical staff. Did you want to speak up?
Yes. Well, I think as we all know, over the years, especially in the last 5 years or so, there's been several analyses of the data, and Donato has summarized, I think, a lot of the key factors, but I just wanted to mention that, there are other drivers such as rising stage. In other words, when 3A stage is rising, then that tends to increase compliance risk. And you mentioned S334 and the sediment entrainment. But with respect to this slide we're looking at here, and I'm sure we've plotted it before, but I don't recall, instead of just using the TP concentration, use the difference between the concentration and the limit. That would more clearly indicate the effect on compliance list of flow. And then you could, repeat that. Instead of putting flow on the x-axis, you could put stage, rising stage, S334 fraction. And the other variable that, may or may not be driving a lot of this is the lake deliveries to the water conservation areas. And that, one of the reasons I think that S334 is opened, and I guess this is part of the operation plan is to enable, the water conservation areas to pass that lake water through the system. And I'm wondering, is that really one of the overall drivers? So anyway, those are just some questions and suggestions of things that we might pull together.
Yeah, I appreciate all of those pieces of input. I kind of just wanted to focus here on the flows and the COP adaptive management threshold. John gave us some view of what was going on outside of the canal system last time around, so I didn't want to
Right.
on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed John's presentation, so may have covered a lot of that.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna go back to, well, John Madden, you've got your hand up.
I just thought while we were on this slide again, I'd point out those 3 points on the right with the higher flow that are below 8 part per billion. In fact, they're all below 7.6, obviously, since that's the compliance limit at that flow. The relative flow through 333, it's a little more complicated than maybe just adding more flow, but I'm not sure which is which, but we're 9%, 18%, and 24% as far as how much water on that annual basis went through 333, and Water Year 19 had 63% go through. So that was one of the other points that we had made that might be relevant to this slide. Just want to point that out. That's it.
Okay. Well, and on the surface, I look at this and I go, hey, we need to keep our flows above 1,061. But anyway, let's see. I was looking for Dan Crawford. If you had any comments or anything at this point, or thoughts on the material here.
Julie, this is Dan. No, I do not have any additional comments. I appreciate Donato's very thorough analysis here.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan. What about you, Frank? I like to go last, so sorry, guys.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you, Donato. Very, very telling presentation here, and I really appreciate it. This is we've looked at this data very similar here at the department, and we, every time we run a statistical analysis and look at it portrayed a little differently, it opened up different questions. So, sticking with this slide you have up here, Donato, remind me what the ultimate goal is for the flows when SERP is built out, and then remind me of what it is when SEP is built out, a part of SERP. Is it 1.7 or 1,700 kiloacre feet, and then is it 2,100 kiloacre feet to deliveries to the Shark River Slough for restoration?
I'm gonna ask Bob Johnson to chime on that. He's much more of an expert on those actual numbers, and I don't have them on the top of my head.
Yeah, I have it on my whiteboard at the office. I just been away from the office for a couple of months, as you can imagine.
Same here.
Yeah.
This is Bob Johnson. So when you look at the SERP targets, it's about 1.3 million acre feet on average per year. So it's a substantial bump over what we see here. And then with projects like SEP moving forward, the proportion of flow through Northeast Shark Slough goes way up. So if you look at the period of the incremental test that we started in 2015 or early 2016, from there to where we are with the combined operating plan, we double the flow volume into Northeast Shark Slough, and SEP doubles that again. So we are moving larger volumes, and we're moving a much higher percentage of flow into Northeast Shark Slough. Those are the two, I'll call them, targets that we have with restoration going forward.
All right. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate the clarification. So one thing you pointed out, Donato, was the relaxation of the 3273. For some reason, that 6.8 limit, it just didn't cross my mind earlier, but I know how that has a correlation associated with relaxing the constraint that was on the L29 canal just east of the 333, allowing that stage to go higher also to provide more delivery. So good point on that. I really appreciate you bringing that up to light. Could you move forward a couple of slides where you identify all flows in the connection between the 333 and the S152? Yeah, so it's difficult to see with the blue and the black and the red there, but it's, to me, what I see is the S152 seems to be a lower concentration than the 333, and the S152 is approximately 8 miles north of the 333. Is that, am I reading that correctly? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the bottom left hand
Right.
graphic there, Donato.
That is my interpretation, and I've been looking at that for a few years, and so it's kind of leaning that we're getting less influence from the L67A on these concentrations at 333, which is why I talked about the sediments from the L29 canal, which might be supporting some higher concentrations that we're seeing at 333 when we get this turbulent dynamic happening.
Gotcha.
It does seem like there's a disconnect from, like, if you go up to the S9, so you have a slightly higher concentration of S9 and you get to 152 and it's dropped. And we jump back up when we get down to 333. So that disconnect suggests that there's some influence coming from at least on the L29 west of 333.
Okay.
This is Bill. I have another comment. Donato, could you go back to the concentration versus flow slide? Yeah. So, you know, you're pointing out water year 2019 tends to be, you know, there's a lot of data points, but it is, the concentrations were lower. They didn't go above, I think you said 8, I forget. So I think, you know, we shouldn't forget, I mean, in previous years when there's been an excursion or exceedance, we've, you know, pointed out the long-term decreasing trends in the marsh concentration upstream, as well as some of the structures. And I don't know, I haven't updated my analysis through, you know, 2020 yet, but I mean, my sense is that those trends may have slackened off, but they still exist. So that was, to my recollection, that was one of the main reasons for, you know, being a little patient about, you know, for predicting that things might improve in the future. So I think we should keep that in mind and, you know, update the trend analyses.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was one of the comments that I had on this slide about the trends, because there is a point, if you go back further than water year 2006, you go to water year 2005, we did actually have an exceedance, and we were above the 1061, but I think that is being washed out because of the declining trends that we're seeing, particularly in the marsh upstream of the L29 canal. And then we see those trends, as you just pointed out again, at the S12s. So I think that is playing in the bear and will continue to play a role in the concentrations we're seeing and the loads we're seeing going to the park over time.
All right. Hey, Donato, Frank again. Continue on. On page 8. So it's semantics, right? And I know in the TOC world, we like to, when we see the word exceedance and that bottom graphic there in 2012, my understanding that that was excused due to a data error in 2012. 2014 was, we did vote and it was an exceedance. 2017, as you mentioned earlier, was a extraordinarily natural phenomenon. And now we're faced with this discussion today with 2019. Just semantics there, maybe changing this if it goes to record. When we say exceedance on that bottom table there.
Good
maybe
point.
Above a limit or something like that.
Yeah, I'll make that correction. Good point.
Other than that, sir, I think we'll talk about it in a little bit. And I think you've done a great job. The one thing that I maybe illustrate a little bit more is the seasonality of the flows. And I think you breached on it earlier, that we delivered earlier through the 333 at a lower stage in water year 19 than we have in the past. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Maybe back on that graph. Yeah, there we go.
Takes a while for this slide to
right
unmute. So yeah, well, you can see generally we're declining. Like my real point was not that we're delivered earlier, but it's more volatile flows that we're normally seeing. So you can think about that slide that I had the video of the irregular floor in front of the 333. You can expect these type of changes in the flow to cause substantial disturbance to the canal floor and help suspend that sediment into the water column. Also, the other point that I was making here was that this red line, which represents the 334, is much lower than the flows that were coming into the 333 during that period. So we never had the benefit of removing any of these slightly higher concentrations from the compliance calculation. So we were flowing through most of this period of time. It's just highly volatile. And in my, I'll talk about that in the next presentation. But yeah, we had substantial flow. Did I answer your question? I'm not really clear what the question was.
No, you're good, Donato. I just want to go back and revisit this to take a deeper dive at it and take another look at it. I appreciate it. I don't have any additional questions, so thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Here I am talking on mute. I was hoping you folks would all already cover all my comments and questions, but that did not happen. One thing I wanted to ask Donato, you used grab sample data here or auto samplers or both?
This is all grab samples.
Everything in your presentation is grab samples. That's great. Thank you. Let's see. We covered my question on that slide. On slide number 4, I just have a gee whiz question. Here you're talking about S333 being used almost solely during the dry to wet season transition. Was that the case only for water year 19, or was that the case for some of the other years? And it's probably embedded in some of your later graphics here, but I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
So on slide 5, I present how it's distributed over just since October 2015. The same pattern can go back pretty far. I think it goes back to 2000. I'm talking off the top of my head. No, don't quote me on that. Just stick with what you see here on the figure. There are several years where we see that the 333 is we're solely relying on.
Yeah, okay. Let me see what else I had here. I had a comment actually on slide 8. And I was a little curious if you had looked at this, because this is a very interesting presentation of this particular data. And I know you mentioned 2011 was a dry year and so on and so forth, but one of the things that I find very interesting is water year 14, you had more or less equal flows through 333, above and below 9.2 feet. 2019, we had a little more. But then you look at 2016, which isn't as obvious, right? But you can definitely guess there might have been more flow at less than 9.2 feet proportionally than some of the other years. And so the exceedance or the being above the limit, we'll put it that way, actually took place the following year. And I think the same thing happened relative to 2011. So I just wanted to mention that because I really liked the graphic at the top, but I'm wondering also if we had looked at this monthly or some other kind of frequency, I'm wondering, is there a lag time here? That we just happened to hit it during the same water year for 14 and 19, and it lagged a year from 11 to being over the limit in 12, and the same thing from 16 to 17. Did you by any chance look at that at all?
I actually looked pretty heavily again at the 16 and 17. I'm not going to argue against the lag time, but water year 17 was really anomalous. For the first half of the year, we were barely delivering any water, and stages were decent enough to do that. But then all of a sudden in June, we just shot up. Flows increased substantially out of the clear blue because of that rainfall event. And then we kept higher flows throughout the rest of the year. That's why you don't see much flow happening below 9.2 feet in the water year 17. Because we just didn't send in a lot of that water when the stage levels came low. There was a very short period when we did get low, and then that huge rainfall event came and shot us right back up well above 9.2 feet. And we just started delivering thereafter. So I really can't link that to a lag from the previous year, but maybe we should investigate that a little further to think that through clearer.
Well, yeah, it was just something that kind of popped out when I was looking at these slides. My other question or comment I've written down on a slide whose number I can't read, slide 10, but maybe it's an overall question or comment for you. I'm looking at the bullet points on the right-hand side here. So you're saying, and that's the slide that I wrote my question on, but it may really apply to other areas of your presentation. So here you're saying that because the dry-wet transition hovered around 9, it promoted higher concentration in the delivered water. And my question had to do with a mechanism, but really, I guess what I'm wondering, you're focusing on localized effects here, if you will, rather than treated lake water coming through the conservation areas or some of the other ways we get water down there. So are you, and I'm not saying the rest of us haven't landed here at some point, Donato, but it looks like you're really feeling and focusing, and the video is pretty telling as well, that these are kind of localized conditions that have taken place to potentially be a cause here.
Yes, so what I'm looking at is that increased magnitude, or what seemed like to be an exaggerated pattern of phosphorus concentrations spiking 333 relative to the other regional structures. And so that pattern seems to be bearing out, and so that's the investigation we've been doing with respect to trying to understand what's going on dynamic-wise at the 333 structure. And so it seems like it's pretty localized to the 333. Based on these magnitudes and how much dependence we have on that structure during this
Sure. The other question I had, and I know you didn't really answer it, but I was curious a little bit more. You mentioned on slide 13, Henry Versino's work that's being done. When are you expecting that particular study to be finished?
Well, that study has been wrapped up. We're in the process of reviewing and going back and forth on the final report between Henry. So we're working towards getting that, bringing it out to the larger forum so everyone has the opportunity to.
Okay. It just looks like you're really targeting the sediments or the flock or whatever it is that's getting moved around there, which again was pretty obvious in your video. I didn't know, are there other district technical folks with questions, John maybe, or anybody?
Hey, Julie,
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. Stuart, I see you're unmuted. Did you have comments or questions?
Yes, I had a question. These, on this slide 13, these preliminary results are interesting. I'm just wondering what would be the future path forward if any more investigation could be looked into this. Trying to determine where the sediments are coming from, if it's not necessarily the material is sourced from coming down the L67A, if it's some marsh canal interaction, what would be the future of looking into that more? That's one question. And the other thing that I note, which I actually just noticed now looking at slide 13, is the north-south orientation in the marsh above the M3 site of all the airboat trails, that I'm wondering how heavily trafficked that is. And it's just kind of curious, the orientation of the airboat trails there, and if there's any relativity to what we're seeing in the L29 canal, which maybe might borne out by doing more monitoring going to the west in the L29 also, to see what type of interactions are occurring between the marsh and the canal and where that sediment is coming from.
All right, so to your first question, what is our path forward? We have initiated a phase 2 of this study in-house at the park. Dilip Shinde is leading that effort. We have reached out to you, the district and FDEP, to get a little input on our next steps. But right now, one of the biggest things, we're gonna go collect more sediment samples to verify what's been done in phase 1. It's gonna have a stronger or greater distribution across these canals closer to the S333. So we'll have 15 samples going on both of these canals for sediments. We're also going to be doing a cross section in front of the S333 structure, which will go from the bottom of the canal to the surface water. And that'll be aimed at when we do the next opening of the S333 discharge structure. So, once we go to that quiescent period for that dry to wet season transition period, we want to go back out there and then collect samples a couple of times to get an idea of what the disturbance that we're seeing that I demonstrated in the videos, to see what that actually means from a chemical perspective. And so we'll be collecting samples as a cross section in front of that structure as well. We have not taken it to the next step of trying to source where those sediments are coming from. Once we figure them out, we need to first verify what we found in the first phase of the study, make sure that was correct, then do that in the second phase of the study. But this is a good idea to take it to the next step, which would be to link it back to where the sources are. But right now, it just seems like we're getting a lot of the muck in the L29 versus what's in the L67A. So it seems like this route that you're describing here with the airboats that we've all been looking at for a long time may be contributing to that sediment. Alternatively, that pattern can be going even further west. So it's not really clear yet, but phase 2 should help us clear that up as well. Did I address your questions?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this, or your thoughts from the reps?
Julie, one thing for me, that this was in addition to what John Madden had already presented. And back on that last time when we met, to me, seemed like we were at a point where we all agreed that there was no error, and we were still just trying to make sure that there was no extraordinary natural phenomenon. These results to me tell me that they support for me that there was no extraordinary natural phenomenon. I'm wondering if we can move this to close out the water year 19, if there's nobody else going to be bringing anything else to the table to discuss specific to the extraordinary natural phenomenon point.
Okay, boy, that sounds like you're getting to the 3 questions, Donato. Which I think is what you wanted to do here. And I would ask the folks again, and we went through this at the last meeting, but there's nothing wrong with asking again now that we have more information. If we feel we've sufficiently evaluated the information to get a better understanding of what might have caused the exceedance, and I stress the word might here, and has the TOC determined there's substantial evidence that the exceedance is due to error, extraordinary natural phenomenon, which then takes us to looking at Appendix C remedies. So what are the thoughts from the reps here? Have you seen enough information now to determine whether or not there's substantial evidence that the exceedance is due to error or extraordinary natural phenomena?
I just voiced my opinion. Do I need to say it again?
No, that's okay. Well, Donato says no. Lori, Frank, Dan, what about you guys?
Hey, Julie, I thought I heard someone else about to chime in. This is Lori with the Refuge. I believe I've seen enough, so I don't really need any further analysis.
Julie, this is Dan. I concur as well. I think we have fully analyzed the contributing factors to the 2019 exceedance. Over.
Best we can anyway, Frank.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I concur. We've looked at this data pretty thoroughly within John's presentation and now Donato's presentation. I feel that we can move forward saying that this was not due to any error or natural phenomenon. I do want to make a comment that it really feels that the potential causation of this is very localized to the 333 and very much maybe even localized both geographically and seasonality around the 333. So I just want to make that point in addition to my previous comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I actually agree with all of you as well. I don't see any error or extraordinary natural phenomenon. So that would mean we move on to our other action item that we had is to start thinking about considering Appendix C and potential remedies that could be taken. And I don't know if y'all have had a chance to do that, but I believe Donato's part 2 is looking at possible ideas in that regard, although I'm just going to throw out now, I'm struggling with how Appendix C actually applies to this particular situation, so something for us to keep in mind. Did you want to launch into your next presentation, Donato?
Yes, give me a second.
Or it's noon, did you guys need to take a break?
No, I don't need a break.
Okay.
Does anyone, I can't speak for everybody though. Are we taking this, we're moving forward?
Presentation, Donato, or is Kim sharing this one?
No, I'm gonna do it, but I'm still waiting for you to get the answer if we're moving forward or taking a lunch break.
Hey, Julie, this is Frank. I'm good moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Dan and Lori, are you guys okay moving forward?
Yes, let's move forward.
All right. Okay, Donato, no lunch break.
Thank you. All right, so this is just basically following up. So you guys do need to remember some of the stuff I talked about in the last presentation. So I'm just gonna really focus in on some of the potential operational considerations that we can put on the table to try to ameliorate some of these higher spiking concentrations we've been experiencing at S333. Just a reminder, we do know that when the concentrations are increasing under low stage coupled with moderate conditions, we tend to send those higher concentrations through the structure, and that can help us, that can lead to exceedances. Then obviously maintaining stages near 9.2 foot threshold while flows are going, and we can see higher concentrations as well. So to ameliorate some of this, we're looking at, and we've talked about this before, and I think there's some buy-in on this option, which is shifting flows from the 333 north. And the idea there is we would have the benefit of having less organic material coming out of the L67A, and we'll also be out of that dog leg, so that 90-degree turn. So we should see less turbulence at S333 north, and we should, so have less of that entrainment of the phosphorus in that, in the samples there. The caveat here is that we have been tracking the 333 North, even though it hasn't been flowing, and concentrations seem to be parallel with those that we've been looking at through 333. So that might shift, particularly once the structure opens and we have operations there. So I'm not 100% sure that's a 100% fix, but it should help alleviate some of this, particularly that dog leg issue. Another option or thing that we should be considering from an operational perspective, and that's all of that sediment material I was showing you in the videos. Dredging that upstream seems like an easy fix. We are close here to October now and about to start the new water year. So if we could do anything to implement some dredging and getting that sediment out of the system before we move into the next water year, that seems like they might help us maintain compliance for the next water year. I pointed out during the video that the auto sampler is located near the embankment of the canal. Seems like doing some type of armoring of that canal using some granite rocks or something to that extent, something real cheap and inexpensive, could help reduce any type of leaching that we're experiencing from that embankment. So these are like easy, close, near-term fixes. Some other type of fixes that I don't have listed here are like aprons in front of the 333 structure. Obviously that would be expensive and costly and would take forever to accomplish, but that would get rid of some of that irregularity that we see in the canal and make it more challenging for the sediments to be suspended under turbulent events. Another thing that when we brought this to the TOC a few meetings ago, Jim Riley from the Corps, he presented the combined operation plan adaptive management strategies that we developed and I mentioned earlier in the first presentation. And I'll just touch on those quickly on the next slide just to remind you of what they do. And then finally raising the seal at the S333. The idea here is that turbidity that I'm describing in training that sediment into the water column, if we raise the seal slightly, there's a potential that we can reduce the energy of that material and then allow some of that to settle out before it goes back over the structure. That probably wouldn't help improve what we're seeing concentration-wise at the auto samplers and the grab samples, which are in front of the structure, but it would help reduce some of the load going through the structure. And I think some of this needs to be modeled. Given our time constraints, though, I think the dredging needs to happen pretty fast. I think we can pretty much conclude that that would give us some benefits immediately, but the seal, I think that should definitely be modeled using some physical-based modeled activities. And I know the district has done some of this type of physical-based modeling, particularly for the 333 North structure recently. I said I would touch on the combined adaptive management options that we put together, and these are that's 333. So when we're in this low stage window, basically the idea here is once we drop below that 8.5 foot threshold at the headwater of S333, we would reduce stages. So this is, so we came from the high water levels and we started going low. And then once we drop below this 8.5 feet, then the idea is to reduce the flows to 150 CFS or less. But it should be continuous flows, not volatile up and down, turn it off and on flows. It should be continuous flows. And then we should keep it at that type of level close to the 150 CFS, not at the 150 CFS until we increase above the 9.2 feet stage at the S333. In addition to that, if we do exceed the 150 CFS, if that's required by the rainfall plan, then we should consider parsing that water out between the S12s, which we know all have lower concentrations than the S333. And we can do that for some period of time. We don't want to do it through the whole period of time because again, the objective is to get more water to Northeast Shark River Slough. But if we could do it until we get up close to the 9.2 feet, that might help. And then diverting some of the flows that we would plan to deliver through S12D, diverting 25% of that towards S12C, where we have even lower concentrations than we do at S12D, that would help benefit as well. But again, this should be very limited amounts of time because the thrust is to get more water to Northeast Shark River Slough. And then this final concept is the reduction of the dry season recession rates. So starting in starting in December, if we're below 10 feet, then we would reduce our anticipated discharge rates through the structures to keep a pool of water in the L29 on the western side of S333. So we'll have higher stages going into that April to July transition period. So those are the short-term operational considerations. Moving to the long-term, and to me, the long-term is really about getting us more flow and getting past that 1061,000 acre feet annually. But starting with what's on the table right now, what we've been looking at since 2012 for our remedies for actually 2014 for our remedies for exceedances. Restoration strategy stands king here, getting our concentrations down to the Q-Bell and delivering those at that Q-Bell level should help long-term. As it trickles through the system, it should help get our concentrations down and continue those long-term downward trends that we've been experiencing going through the structures to the Northeast Shark River Slough and to the Shark River Slough. Other relative long-term operational considerations, this is where I really get into increasing the flow volumes coming to the park. It starts with SERP. Going back to SERP, and Bob Johnson pointed on this, we were supposed to be getting around 1,300,000 acre feet of flow coming to the park on an annual basis. And the idea there was we would have captured a lot of the water that was seeping out of Conservation Area 2 and 3 and water that may be being delivered to tide. We'll capture that, reroute that down to the park and incorporate that into our flows. Another idea is to help improve the water quality coming off the Western basins. We know that those concentrations over there on the western side of Conservation Area 3, those are still sitting up pretty high coming out of the S190 and S140. Discharging into Conservation Area 3, we do see pretty high signals down there on the L28 canal at the S344 structure. And if you map those patterns on top of what you see at S12A, you see a pretty similar pattern, even magnitude-wise. So it seems like reducing concentrations coming out of the Western basins will help get us into compliance long-term or get our concentrations coming down long-term. Establishing mechanisms to provide that low continuous flow volume throughout the dry season that I was describing on the previous slides when we were talking about that less than 150 CFS. Coming up with something like that to be able to continuously have these flows through this dry season seems like it will help us get our concentrations in control. And then decompartmentalization as envisioned in SEP and SERP. So now we're talking about backfilling the Miami Canal, a portion of the Miami Canal, helping fan water out across the marsh, getting more sheet flow coming down through Conservation Area 3 down to the park. We're also talking about the Blue Shanty, reorienting the L67C levee, going north to south through Conservation Area 3B and creating a flow path through the marsh directly into the Northeast Shark River Slough. We're talking about really good improvement of water quality there coming into the park. Then we have the modification of the L67A, which was contemplated in SERP. And the idea here was that we would create more connectivity between the canal and the marsh by putting some plugs into the L67A. There were many constraints to that concept, mostly focusing around the fishing activity, the sportsman activity, and that's heavily documented in the SERP documentation. But trying to come back to some concept like that, where we actually create more connectivity between the canal and the marsh, will help reduce concentrations long-term. So when I talk about what's coming out of the SERP, this is out of the Croji report, Reengineering Water Storage in the Everglades, Risk and Opportunities from 2005. This represents the 1995 base map, and I know it's exceptionally complicated, but I don't want you to focus on that complication. Just look here at the northern boundary of the park. You can see we are supposed to be getting a total flow of 862,000 acre feet on an annual basis. Since water year 2006, we've been almost at that level, just shortly sly of it at 814,000 acre feet a year. Since we relaxed that constraint, the G3273, you can see that our flows have bumped up substantially. And since water year 2006, we're averaging an annual flow of around 1,200,000 acre feet a year. And then obviously 2019 seems to depart from that. But if you go back to John's presentation on the rain, we were really low. So this is the alternative that should have been coming out of the SERP. Obviously it's been modified substantially since 2005. But this is the feature that I was talking about that would capture some of the seepage in the water sent to tide. It would reroute it over here, and we would get this water brought in over here on the northeast Shark River Slough side. So 963 coming through the top, and then 342,000 acre feet coming northeast Shark River Slough, totaling us to 1,000.
Hey, Donato, you are drifting out a little bit. Could you back up about a minute?
About the what?
If you could back up to where you started talking about the seepage, your voice kind of drifted out.
Okay, sorry about that. So this slide basically is just showing us how we were supposed to capture the seepage and any water that would have been delivered out to tide, return that back to the park, and you can see that that would total us around 1,305,000 acre feet on an annual basis. Since water year 2006, we have achieved that twice. We've been above this 1,305 twice, and each one of those times we were in compliance. I think one of the big thrusts of my discussion was to get more water to the park. So my ask here is to take these things to the next step. So I presented some short-term operational considerations, and those are the ones that I would really want to focus on right now and establish some type of sub-team. For me, it would be the Appendix A sub-team, but if there's some other desirable format that would actually come back and report to this POC, that would be fine as well. But we're looking at discussing the dredging, which needs to happen really soon. We're going to incorporate it for water year 2000, the next water year. Again, starts in October. Then there's the S333 North operation. My understanding is there's a permit request right now for this modification so we can use the 333. So it seems like we're already in step with moving to 333 North. Then there's a discussion about armoring the canal, and then we've already talked about COP adaptive management strategies. So coming up with a team, and then any other ideas that aren't on the table right now that I'm unaware of. I think we need to have some kind of forum where we actually discuss all of these. So my ask is, can we move this to some sub-team? And I'm specifically looking at Appendix A for that sub-team, but other forums are welcome. I'm done.
All right, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I have a couple of comments, but maybe, again, they would be echoed by others. So Lori, if you guys, I'm going to kind of go around everybody. If you have thoughts, questions, or comments, either yourself or from your technical staff. So Lori, what are your thoughts here?
Well, my thoughts are, after seeing the first presentation, was that we certainly needed to look at, the problem solutions a little bit closer. So I think that Donato's ask is very, very appropriate. I would like to see us get together as a technical team and kick around some of these options. And there may be other options, just kind of get together as a group and explore these, because if this is a localized problem that it looks like it is at this point in time, then gosh, wouldn't it be great to get that solved so that we really lessen the opportunity at exceedances. So yeah, I'm for the ask. And at this point, I don't really have any questions for Donato. I thought it was pretty self-explanatory.
Okay, thank you. Dan, what about you?
Hey, Julie, this is Dan. Yeah, I agree with Donato as well. I think based on the data assessment for this particular water year, it's clear that we're dealing with a localized issue around 333. That may not be a one size fits all for other years, but I think for this particular year, I think it is a reasonable suggestion to pursue localized actions to address the sediment that, I think Donato's videos are very, very clear in and around the upstream side of 333. And since the new 333 North structure that's being built by the Water Management District proactively as part of SEP is only 250 feet upstream, I think that whole area is likely to demonstrate very similar sediment deposition. I I would like to reiterate what Donato said, that in an ideal world, we proceed expeditiously with establishing this sub team. Certainly from the Corps' perspective, we're ready to go immediately into that sub-team conversation. No further coordination at the principals level required from my agency. That pre-coordination has already been done. I would like to echo Donato's point that ideally we want to get something in the ground before the start of next water year, which is October. And since, you know, we've deferred some of these conversations on voting on the error and extraordinary natural phenomena, that I think by and large, the federal parties had looked at most of that data going into the May meeting. The state parties had asked for some additional time, but I'd like to just kind of reinforce that we've now lost 3 months of time while we were waiting to have this follow-up conversation. So I think it's in our best interest to move forward expediently to try to have these requisite conversations with the technical sub-team with the aim of, you know, getting some kind of fix in the ground, you know, as soon as we can under the, you know, under the state's obligations under the consent decree. And I think I'd also like to make the point that, you know, the sediment that has the nutrients is a byproduct of sediment loading that's been accumulating in conservation area 3A for as long as we have not met the QBEL at the inflows. And certainly we are not on track yet to meet the QBEL. We have not met the QBEL for all of the inflow points coming into conservation area 3A, and we're at least 5 years away from that. So I think we will need to continue to monitor the progress towards meeting the QBEL, but I think we should move forward with follow-up discussions at a technical sub-team and aim to have, you know, timely action. Over.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate you guys always saying over when you're done talking. I try to mimic you with that, although I don't do very well. Frank, what about you? Do you have some thoughts or comments right now?
Yes, ma'am. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I'll try to use the word over when I'm finished also. So, yeah, I mean, our previous conversation before this presentation was that, yeah, we identified that it was obviously it's very apparent that it's a localized scenario around the 333. Donato brings up a good point about the 333 in operations. Currently, the department is reviewing the request to modify the current permit at the 333 in. We've asked some additional questions back to the water management district, so we're working very closely with that team to ensure that we move forward in an expeditious manner on the 333 in. At the same time, it may be in the best interest for the TOC to have a better understanding of the 333 in and the construction around the 333 in. I think some of these points that Donato is making about the armoring of the canal and possibly dredging could be addressed in the actual construction effort that's ongoing right now. COP adaptive management is my understanding that it's moving forward in the chief's report are being signed in September to move forward, and that would be into the new operational plan, incorporating the both the adaptive management program and the establishment of the criteria that Donato talked about earlier. I struggle with going outside of that particular area from a regional perspective, or isolated situation when we start talking about long-term, especially as we creep up into the restoration strategies world. As we all know, the state has been very much on top of ensuring that restoration strategies is complete. As you look at the water quality today, 3 out of the 5 STAs are meeting the annual long-term limit for the QBEL. The other comments that the other points that Donato had in this presentation, it feels that between the state and federal government and other parties, there are other studies ongoing, and there are other practices ongoing, such as the SEP Luciente Flowway, the Corps starting that work hopefully this year on the L67 structures just north of the S333. So I feel like most of those long-term are, yeah, they're moving forward and they're happening. So we want to make sure that those continue to move forward. So that's my comments, Julie. So over.
All right, thank you, Frank. I guess that means it's my turn. Aside from Donato's mention of restoration strategies, I guess I'm still struggling with the fact that none of this is actually contemplated under Appendix C of the consent decree, but in reality, that doesn't keep any of us from going back to our agencies and to our principals and maybe having them talk about some of these ideas kind of quasi outside the realm of the TOC. I struggle with this group that we're not really, I don't know if the word is authorized or responsible for, but I'm not seeing where we are able to make operational recommendations down in this particular area. And I think, Donato, you have a lot of really great suggestions that ought to be investigated to see if they could be helpful. I'm just not clear that these are under the purview of the TOC. And so that's a little bit of a struggle I'm having. And I guess, Dan, you might have even alluded to some of this, and Frank. I was wondering, things like dredging or armoring, what entity or agency would be responsible for doing those? And then I do have a little experience with projects like that, and this is August, and the next water year starts in less than 2 months. So we're talking about, in the case of armoring and dredging as examples, we're talking about like an emergency procurement here. And I'm kind of questioning who would implement that and how we would get that done in that kind of a time frame, just based on my own experience. And you alluded, I think, somewhere in one of your slides, Donato, about let's see if I can find it. I think you guys can hear me flipping through the paper here, about using modeling to understand the sill and the dredging influence and that type of thing, which I would actually expect if a dredging was going to be done, there would be some sort of engineering analysis done to make sure the dredging was done in the right spots and all of that. But I also worry about dredging as being something that I'm hearing, let's do that in a big hurry. I'm a little concerned that we would be dredging every year and the amount of expense, and that's not really something I thought was anticipated in looking at the whole series of mod waters and SEP and SERP and so forth. So I have a lot of those kind of questions. Even the armoring along the canal embankment, I think that's not a bad suggestion. I am struggling with what I'm hearing of let's do these things in a hurry, number one, because I don't know that there's time to do them by the 1st of October, but and secondly, I wonder if we aren't in a place where each of us as our agency representatives need to go back to the principals and our agency's executives and have these discussions with them. I'm not seeing a reason that the agencies couldn't discuss and agree to possibly some of this through some other process. I'm just not seeing where Appendix C of the consent decree applies. I'm not totally seeing where the TOC as an entity is going to be legally able or authorized in some way to make these things as formal recommendations in our legal process that we have here. And it's, I don't know if we want to form a team. Dan mentioned about delaying 3 months, and I do want to mention there's no reason this group can't request to hold special meetings in between the quarterly meetings. If we need to do something and get it done, we should do that. But I'm not clear that what we're discussing right now is part of the TOC process, and so I certainly wouldn't object to folks going back kind of, hey, we talked about it at the TOC, but it may not be within the purview of the TOC. And should our agency leaders get together, as they do occasionally anyway, and find a way to look at doing any individual, separately or together, however that works out, of some of these items. Because I actually am very grateful, Donato, that you put all this information together. You've got some suggestions here that are real suggestions. I think in some cases, we might want more information, but I don't see the TOC having purview over operations per se, and I don't see the TOC under Appendix C having purview over some of these items or most of these. So that's kind of the struggle I have here. I did wonder in your proposal on the dredging and the armoring, was that something you felt should be cost shared amongst the agencies? Did you think there was a specific agency that ought to be doing that type of work?
I haven't gone that far. I was hoping that we would have a team that we could actually sit down and discuss all of these individual questions that you put on the table, but it sounds like you don't want to have that team. So I don't know who or how funding is distributed or broken down. I'm the tech type, so I need to have that discussion if we're gonna move forward.
Yeah. I see a couple of people with their microphones unmuted. Frank or Lori, did you have, now
Yes,
that I've blurted all my stuff here, did you have something else you want to add?
Hey, Julie, Frank again. Thank you. And you brought up a very good point there when you were discussing, and just like you, I have not had this discussion with my principals. This is kind of the first time it's been presented to me. And yeah, I would welcome a conversation amongst the principals, especially when we're talking about construction projects and short-term and long-term options here. So I think it may be best, in my opinion, to keep it at the principal level at this point. So that's my suggestion. Over.
And Frank, again, would we be imploring our principals to have a conversation really soon as opposed to waiting? I just want to kind of put a little.
I mean, Frank again. So I just want to make sure that my principal is aware of this conversation that we're having today, and then we can have it's up to them, I guess, to reach out and have that consensus of earlier than later regarding these topics.
Okay. Who else did I see unmuted here? Lori?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was trying to talk. My principal has been fully briefed and completely supports us moving forward into a sub-team to discuss these topics. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, thank you. Lori?
Yeah, it says pretty clearly in the consent decree that, as the TOC, it's the Technical Oversight Committee, is that we are, it's our charge to make recommendations on a technical level. So, I don't think we can ignore solutions. And, we've often been criticized for not providing solutions. We look at problems, then we go away for 3 months, and then we come back and we talk about it a little bit more. I'm really glad to see that we're providing solutions. Now, whether they fit in certain locations within, various projects and who can pay this and who can do that. I think right now what we need to be doing, and I think we're trying to do, is let's look at some solutions. And okay, so maybe we go to another agency and say, here's what we're thinking would be a solution. So instead of just tying it down on, this isn't our purview, we don't have the charge to be able to do certain things. I think looking at solutions and other projects and project managers hearing some of our solutions, I think is a really, really good thing. I kind of agree that I would like to try and look at all of these various aspects. And again, maybe we think of some other ideas in a sub-team. I'm not saying we vote on the sub-team right now, but I would love to provide it to our principals and see if they agree with the sub-team. And I mean, I don't know, have we always gone to our principals and said we want to start a sub-team? I don't kind of remember that in the past, but I would like to see us go into sub-team, look at these solutions, and then figure out where they can fit. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Over.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I wasn't keeping track with a checklist, but I guess where I am, the TOC is responsible to go back to our principals and make recommendations and to our agencies, basically, so that the appropriate actions can be taken. I don't disagree with each of us going back and having that discussion with our principals. So that would be number one. Secondly, the Appendix A sub-team, I think, was specifically formulated to look at the equations and everything. So I wanted to point that out. We can always change the composition of the sub-team or give the sub-team a different charge, which I suspect still needs to come from our principals. So that gets into a timing scenario that I'm hearing a little distress from you guys about timing. So, I would think we need modelers, engineers. We need some other people than we may currently have officially on the Appendix A sub-team also. Would we agree to go back to our principals and discuss this to see if the agencies have a way to evaluate these options and possibly find a way to agree on something that could be moved forward? I think that would be the appropriate thing here. And I would suggest we may even need a little more research on a couple of things, which could funnel into designing, if you will, an armoring or a dredging type of scenario. So I'm thinking we have suggested remedies that may be outside the TOC process, but it does not keep us from going back to our agencies to try to make something happen and timely. And so, and I'll go ahead and make a proposal here that we go back to our principals quickly, get their feedback about whether or not they want a separate sub-team or the Appendix A sub-team to be kind of adjusted a little bit to evaluate these. And I would ask you guys, don't wait 3 months to get back to us. If that's the issue I'm hearing, because I am hearing that from a couple of you, we're looking at late October or early November for our next meeting, which is quite some time off. And we are hoping or looking at the S333N actually being completed like right around the corner. So it's fruitful that we might go back to our principals in a hurry as opposed to, over the next month or so that we're ready in 3 months for a meeting where we may or may not have solutions. How do you guys feel about doing that?
Hey, Julie, Frank again. Yeah, I think that's a great approach. I'd be willing to go back to my principal in a very short amount of time, if not today, this week, to have this discussion with him, or them to continue this discussion amongst the principals. So I'm all for that. So that's a great suggestion. Over.
Okay, thank you.
This is
Dan,
Donato. This is
go ahead.
Donato. I'm not clear on what more I would tell my principal right now. So, which is why I feel like we need to actually have a sub-team meeting so that there would be something more substantive for me to tell them. Right now, all I have is implement dredging. We should move operations to 333. But this whole modeling stuff you just discussed, are we going to be trying to go down that road? I don't have any more information to tell him, and he's already suggested that we need to be moving into a sub-team meeting. So I'm ready now to say that the principal is ready to move forward.
All right, well, the rest of us haven't had quite this same, or at least I have not had the same conversation with my principal, I'll put it that way. And I don't mean to mislead you with my use of the word modeling. I am accustomed to, when projects are designed, sometimes you do some little modeling exercises to make sure you got the design right. And in my own opinion, that would apply to armoring or dredging as examples. So I'm not suggesting a big multi-year modeling effort for that, because you guys are all asking to do something quickly. And sometimes that's a little difficult to get done quickly, regardless of whether you're talking about a construction project or other types of things here. So, I'm not clear. I guess I would prefer that the principals tell us they want a sub-team, or the principals tell us they're going to work it out amongst themselves, is kind of where I'm at.
So Julie, this is Lori, and I just want to say that I really agree with some things that you've said, and I'm not saying that these solutions are necessarily in the end going to be a part of the TOC. I think identifying through a sub-team, identifying possible solutions, and then whatever we determine in the end, we may have to pass that off to another group. So I'm not saying, and then let it go. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that we're going to sit here and we're going to manage this project or what have you. So I do agree with you that even if whatever solutions we do come up with will likely have to be passed off somewhere to someone. And if some of the parties need a week or two, if that's possible, I'd like to, kind of get the principals wrapped up in a week or two, if that's possible. I think that would be fine going forward.
Okay, and yeah, because I don't think the TOC is actually based on some prior legalities. I don't think we are able to commit agency resources, but we certainly can recommend agency resources. So I'm getting to a place where I may need an attorney or somebody, or even Mr. Barquette to weigh in. If we discuss this with our principals, do we need to schedule a special meeting to talk about the results of our discussions? Or let's say our principals come back to each of us and indicate that they want to move this outside the TOC process per se, but they're listening, to everyone's recommendations. Do we need to have a quick public meeting to say that in another few weeks, or is that something that can happen somehow in the background and we come back and report on it at the next meeting? I'm not 100% clear on how that would go process-wise, because I think I hear everyone loud and clear not wanting to wait to share the feedback from our principals. It sounds like you guys don't want to wait till October, so.
This is Kenny Heyman with Florida DEP.
Hi, Kenny, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in. I hear the desire about dredging. I mean, as I'm listening to the conversation, I don't know whether there is consensus about the dredging. It sounds like that there is on the federal side. the devil's in the details. So who is going to do the work and who's going to pay for it? And those are issues that the principals would need to weigh in on. I mean, off the top of my head, without knowing historically about dredging, I mean, I guess my assumption is that something that the Army Corps would be doing, but I think that could be discussed. And I mean, the reality is that there is a principals meeting that's going to be happening shortly, and this could be one of those topics that can be discussed. And if there is an agreement to move forward with this, it doesn't need to be brought back to the TOC. The TOC doesn't need to approve each and every remedy. It can just happen. I mean, depending on the timing.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
Julie, this is Dan Crawford. I just want to speak up and acknowledge from the Corps' side in response to Kenny's statement and your comment earlier, Julie, that my agency views this action for, let me reiterate that the 333 North operations is an action already being pursued by the Water Management District through a permit application. So no action needed by TOC. The COP Adaptive Management Plan is an action already being done by the Corps of Engineers, completely independent of this Shark River Slough 2019 exceedance and completely independent of any recommendations coming out of the TOC. So the only two items that Donato is recommending that need TOC principal level coordination is the dredging and the armoring of the canal. So I want to make that clear. And I also want to reiterate from the Corps' perspective, the Corps has no plans to conduct dredging or armoring of that canal at this time. The only reason those actions would be pursued would be in response to this 2019 Shark River Slough exceedance if confirmed through the principals. Over.
Okay, thank you. And then again, this may be a Kenny question, but I just want to reiterate, because I mentioned this earlier about Appendix C. So we have, we have our marching orders from before, contemplating remedies in Appendix C, and almost none of this is contemplated under the consent decree. I have no objection to each of us actually going and having the conversations with our principals outside the TOC process. So maybe I'm answering my own question here in that if the principals or other agency executives or agency leaders get together and choose to implement some of these, it's not something that the TOC needs to get back together and weigh in on, because we're discussing it now. Over.
Well, Julie, if that question's for me, yeah, I mean, some of these items I think are, yeah, I mean, a lot of the projects, for instance, the SERP projects, I mean, those tasks have already been assigned. So for instance, when we're talking about decompartmentalization or blue shanty, I mean, we know that those projects are assigned to the federal family and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, I think we can have a conversation. I mean, I think that those are conversations that, the principals have been and will continue to have. And really, I guess the question is outside of those projects that are already in the pipeline, and really it's the focus on these handful of short-term items. Are these things that folks want to do and do quickly? And then, I mean, Dan was explaining that it currently isn't in, the Army Corps' plan. I mean, I'm gonna assume it wasn't on the Water Management District drawing board either. And so some of it may just be, do we think that this is helpful? And where, can it be done quickly? Is there a pot of money out there to do it quickly? And again, those are things that are outside of technical conversations. Those are, nuts and bolts and money. And I mean, armoring is dealing with engineers and so on and so forth. And
yeah. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I always
Julie,
this
is John Barquette. I'll just make one observation when you make reference to Appendix C. And
yes.
what's contemplated, what's not contemplated. The language of the consent decree is that if the control programs, if notwithstanding implementation of the control programs, if the park phosphorus limit or concentration level is violated, then additional remedies will be taken. There is a such as clause that follows that,
okay.
referring to STAs, such as expansion of STAs, more intensive management of STAs, a more stringent EAA regulatory program, or a combination of the above. But I don't regard the such as language as controlling all of the remedies that could be considered. So I don't know if by your prior comment that when you said that whatever's been proposed wasn't contemplated, Appendix C does list some ideas, but it doesn't limit you to those ideas. Then additional remedies will be taken. That's really your standard, is additional remedies will be taken. And you or the principals have to decide what those additional remedies will be.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I think I'm hearing somewhat of a consensus, if you will, that we're going to go talk with our principals and get some sort of feedback from them on how they would like us to proceed. And I do have someone in the public forum who may want to make a comment here, so let me get to that in a minute. Let me just make sure I understand this email I just received. Okay. I don't know, did you guys want to get any public comments now? We've got Judith Coleman is maybe interested in making a comment. If you guys want to unmute Judith, she's on 5031. She does not have her hand raised, so just so you're aware of that, but she's only got a few more minutes to be here. So Devon, are you able to unmute 5031?
Hi, this is Judy Coleman. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can. Thank you.
Phenomenal. I just wanted to let you know which number I was. I'm counsel for the United States, and I just wanted to let you know that I was on, and I'm here if there was going to be some sort of request for the attorney for the U.S. to say something.
Okay.
But generally, responsive to Kenny's concerns, because he and I have talked about this before. I think that the TOC is free to discuss what it wants to discuss and recommend what it wants to recommend. And I think that the principals are in contact with each other all of the time. And I don't know the public meeting laws that you operate under, but I myself don't see a problem with recommending the principals discuss these issues, and then there can be a report back at the next TOC meeting on that, because I feel like by the time the principals talk about things and engage, it doesn't, you'll be in a report back situation. I don't see a formal structure being established, but that's any case, my point is just that the TOC is free to discuss and recommend what it wants to, in my view.
All right, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I don't know if we're actually taking a formal vote or an informal vote here. I think what we're doing is going back to our principles with specifically the recommendations that Donato has, and you know, gosh, I guess any of us could think of something else in the meantime that we would discuss with our principals and have them discuss it. I think Kenny mentioned there's a meeting pretty soon. So is that acceptable to everybody? Is that our consensus for the moment?
Julie, this is Dan. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, yeah, this is Dan Crawford. I think that is the consensus for the moment. I would just ask that to make sure that the meeting minutes reflect that the federal parties are advocating we try to pursue a timely solution to this 2019 exceedance. Over.
Okay, thank you. Donato, Lori, Frank.
Yeah, and I'd also like to see that we're requesting, the group is requesting a timely conversation with the principals, and you know, let's try to set a deadline of maybe a couple of weeks or something like that, just so that we can, if approved, then we could start moving forward with the sub team.
Okay. Anything else from Frank or Donato?
Hey, Julie, I'm fine with that. Like I said, I need to brief my principal, and hopefully there's an expeditious discussion amongst the principals to talk exactly about this topic here. So I'm good with that approach. Thank you. Over.
Okay, thank you. I am as well. Donato, I guess you're okay with it. I know you've had your discussion already.
This approach is not my desired approach. I would have preferred to be in a meeting where we could actually hear other people's ideas on how to pursue forward. It seems like they're now being limited to what I put on the table. But if this is the process that is going to be the consensus, then we'll move forward. And again, it needs to move fast. So I support what Lori just said about expediting it in a few weeks.
Okay, thank you. I don't know that we necessarily need public comments right now, but I do have one at least. So in the interest of open communication, let's see if the individual with last four digits of 5372, you have some comments? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, this is Drew Martin with the Sierra Club Loxahatchee Group. I just want to say that I thought you had a great discussion, and I actually sat through the 2.5 hours. So I just wanted you to know that there was a member of the public on the phone listening in. And I want to thank Donato for his ideas. I don't know what armoring means, but I think that dredging might be a temporary solution depending upon how quickly some of these projects are going to go through, like the SERP project. So I thought that everyone on the call reached a good consensus, and I just thank everyone for their hard work, and thank you for all you're doing.
Okay.
Over.
Melody, next. And Melody, you'll need to unmute yourself. There we go.
I did it. Thank you very much, Julie, for the opportunity to provide public comment. Again, for the record, this is Melody from the Everglades Foundation. I would like first to thank Donato for his presentations. It was very informative. The high phosphorus levels at the S33 structure have been observed for several years now during the transition period, and it's going to happen again unless we find a fix, a solution to this. The sediments accumulated in the canal are because of decades of not achieving the Q-bed. And we need to move fast on this and find a solution to this localized problem. Having a sub-team to look at this problem, and especially at these, not the problem, at the solutions, I think, dredging operations is is very much needed. And the proposal to have a sub-team meeting to look at this is what the public is looking for. We are looking for, from this TOC, this committee to have a robust technical discussion on solutions to meet the consent decree requirement. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have anybody else? I saw somebody put their hand back down. I'm not seeing any other public comment right now. I would only ask, guys, that we also consider whether or not we need to do any additional research. I know I just briefly used that word a couple of minutes ago, but I think there's some things, you know, Donato mentioned that the FIU study will be coming out pretty soon. That was probably a really great addition to our bucket of information here. So you may want to also discuss additional research with your principals. Okay. I think that's about as far as we're going to get on this particular agenda item today. So if you guys are okay, we'll move on to the next item, agenda item number 4. This is stated as an Appendix A sub-team update, and I know we put Paul's name on here because he's been hosting and moving that group along. Paul, I don't know if you have anything you want to say. John has prepared a couple of handouts that we could look at and show on the screen, and I just want to read to the group. At the last meeting, there was a good discussion about the different compliance calculations, and you could see in John Madden's presentation earlier where you know, we're still doing multiple calculations, and gosh, it sure would be nice to zero in on an equation. So at the last meeting, the representatives agreed to discuss with our principals a recommendation to use method 1.5 for Shark River Slough and method 3 for Taylor Slough in the coastal basins, and then return here today to confirm this. And if John or Kim maybe could put one of these up, maybe we take these one at a time. I will say I have had this discussion with my principal, so you know, I'm certainly ready to confirm if that's where we've landed here. So do we want to talk about method 1.5 for Shark River Slough? If somebody could bring that up on the screen, it would be really great. You can hear me.
I can do that.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks a lot, John. I'm kind of shuffling through my papers, as you can hear.
Paul, was there anything else that you wanted to say first before I get started?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could just real quickly mention that since the last TOC meeting, obviously the sub-team hasn't met, so there's nothing really dire to report out from the sub-team. And in the last meeting, like Julie noted, that, you know, there was discussions about the water quality and flow monitoring, you know, data, how it's combined to calculate the flow weighted mean for each particular method. You know, both the currently existing method, that's kind of what the benchmark is, and then the proposed method, that's the best method to kind of measure things based on the pros and cons list that we discussed and presented last meeting. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the pros and cons list was posted again to the TOC webpage for this meeting as well, just as kind of review. And later on, I guess we could, if there's any additional questions, you know, since there's been time to discuss it or think about it, we can entertain some questions or direct them to people that can answer those questions. So if John, if you want to go ahead and present those sheets, go right on ahead.
Thank you, Paul. All right, so John is showing the Shark River Slough Method 1.5 proposal in more detail than what we looked at the last meeting, but we just wanted to make sure everything's clear. So John, did you want to step us through this really quickly?
Yep, I was just trying to find my unmute button, which moved as soon as I took control. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we
Great.
can.
Okay. So previously I did have a presentation. If I need to, I can bring up some slides, but essentially I think the overall concept that was communicated was that we're currently reporting a method 1, which was the original Shark River Slough equation in the Appendix A of the consent decree. Since then, structures 355A and B, which are outflows directly from Conservation Area 3B coming into the L29, had been added, even though they flow very rarely. But subsequently, a S356 structure and the presentation I showed earlier starting to contribute more flow to that system. But we know the 356 conveys some flows that are originating from the conservation areas and coming down the east side through another structure called the S335. But a portion of the S356 flow also potentially comes from seepage return that has left the park and entered the canal east of the park, the L31 north, and comes back up. So under the consent decree, we're trying to meet that requirement to measure the original equation plus additional inflows from WCAs to Shark River Slough. So the concept is just to estimate that portion of the volume pumped at 356 into Shark River Slough, and the equation was focused on the flows in the previous presentation. I just wanted to give a little more detail so we made sure we're all talking about the same thing when the TOC reps end up moving forward with any action. So our additional methodology takes the phosphorus at each structure and pairs it with the flow for each sampling and biweekly sampling event to come up with a composite or a flow weighted mean concentration. And for years, the 333 flow has been only a subset of that has been used. It's the portion that that doesn't end up flowing past into around the corner through 334. So there's a fraction here that's done, and then 355 and 355B were later added to that. So all the structures that flow into the L29, less that portion, that volume that passes through, divided by the total. So gives us, if half the inflows are leaving, then this overall will be 50%, and it's just divided equally between the inflows as far as how much of a proportion of that flow is associated with the phosphorus. Hopefully that's somewhat clear. The new proposal is to add in one more term that considers the S356 pump and takes the minimum of what's coming from upstream from the WCAs through 335 and what's pushed into the L29 by the 356 pump station, and then overall incorporate that into this fraction of the L29 east inflows that go to Shark River Slough. So again, whatever proportion of all those inflows just gets divided evenly amongst all the structures that are flowing in. Typically 334 will not be discharging at the same time 356 is pumping because they're adjacent structures and going opposite directions. But in the case that did happen, it would be handled that way. So again, we retain all the terms previously, and we add in flow term. And as far as the limit calculation, the proposal is to add in that fraction. I believe the proposal is to add in that fraction. I'm sorry, I just had a second thought here as to what the current long-term limit calculation does. Paul, can you back me up on this? Or I don't know why I'm having this second thought here, but is this correct as far as what we're proposing for the limit? Are we?
I believe so.
Okay. Maybe Stuart. Do we discount? We don't discount that by 334, do we?
No, I think the precedent has been to leave the long-term limit calculation the same without the 334. It's the actual flow-weighted mean concentration calculation that's going to change. So that line is really for the tracking of the flow-weighted mean annually. Right?
Right. So the long-term limit is going to include all these, but it's this portion of the equation would be eliminated. Is that correct?
That's correct, because that's what was done when the 355 A and B structures were added. The 334 was not discounted from the actual limit.
Right. So
and
my apologies.
Here's slides too, John. So what Stuart just said is correct.
Right. Okay. So my error here, when we're talking about the long-term limit, we do not subtract out the 334. So on we'll have to have a addendum or a revised slide posted later that makes that correction, but it's consistent with the previous equation, and this is incorrect as well. So 334 is not subtracted out for calculation of the long-term limit, and my apologies for trying to get a last-minute addition here to clarify things and didn't achieve that completely, but
so John, if I could add, what you actually need as an amendment would be two lines. One is the annual long-term limit based on those methods without 334, and then the annual flow-weighted mean calculation, a line for that, which will include the subtraction of 334. So you probably need to show both.
okay. So define what this total flow is for the flow-weighted mean, and then have a separate one for the limit, which incorporates all the flows during the year.
Correct. That would bring clarity.
This is Julie. Does everybody understand what Stuart and John just discussed? If you do, maybe we can move forward and we'll post a corrected handout out on the website.
Donato understands.
Thank you,
I'm
Donato.
okay. I'm okay, Julie. This is Lori.
Yep, Dan's okay as well. Thanks, Julie.
Okay, so I believe the ask was we were to check with our principals and make sure they were okay that we landed here with method 1.5. Did each of you do that?
Yes, I did.
Yes, my principal approves.
Okay.
This is Dan. Yeah. Yes, Julie. This is Dan. I have coordinated with my principals, and I would make a motion that we accept method 1.5.
Okay, thank you. Frank?
Hey, Julie, Frank again. Yes, ma'am. I have met with my principal and we have coordinated and we draw the conclusion that we are good with 1.5.
All right, thank you. I didn't get the "we are good" part from you, Lori.
Okay, we are good. Yeah,
All
we
right.
definitely coordinated, had a conversation, debrief, and my principal agrees.
All right, great. And I did the same, and my principal is okay with method 1.5, but we do want it on the record that, you know, the original methodology is slightly different, and so, you know, he just wants to mention that. You guys put some uncertainties associated with this in the pros and cons document, and that kind of covers my principal's comment. I would almost say we're not talking about the original equation being apples and 1.5 being oranges, but I would describe 1.5 as maybe a different flavor of apple than was originally anticipated. But we did discuss with our principal, and he's agreeable to 1.5. So I think we're done with that one.
Okay.
All right, the next one was for Taylor Slough and coastal basins, and I think this was a little simpler. Oh, and I did want to back up a minute. We may, as time moves forward, end up still needing to look at method 1 for Shark River Slough, just as extra information, should we have, you know, further discussions. But anyway, for Taylor Slough and coastal basins seems a little cleaner. We agreed to discuss with our principals using method 3, and John has that up on the screen if you want to run through that real quickly.
Absolutely. And again, we had 3 methods here for simplicity and clarity on what we're discussing today. I only included the existing method 1 and the proposed method 3. I think what we heard was the selection of method 3 and discussion of the pros and cons was incorporating as much of the monitoring data at direct discharge points to the park that we could. It adds a new surface water inflow at G737 downstream of S200 pump station, as I had mentioned in my presentation earlier today. And it takes the portion of the volume pumped into the C111 detention area through 332D. Previously, the method 1 uses all of that in association with its TP concentrations for computing flow weighted means. And it parses out the portion that we monitor through S328 culvert structure with phosphorus levels that are measured at that station. And it also takes the small portion of flows that occasionally go through 332DX1 to the adjacent detention area north out of the flow weighted mean calculation. So down here we can see it maintains the S18C, adds G737 flow and TP, and backs out the 332DX flow and the 328 flow from the phosphorus that's measured at the 332D and adds back in the 328 flow and phosphorus. So it's kind of trying to emulate as much of the monitor data as we can. Any questions?
I don't have any questions. Can we make a run around the room, so to speak? Did you guys discuss this with your principal, and are they okay with this recommendation? Donato, you want to go first?
My principal has reviewed and accepted this methodology and supports our recommendation for method 3.
Lori?
Yes, I have discussed with my principal, and we agree, and my principal agrees.
All right, thank you. Dan?
Yes, the Corps of Engineers has coordinated with Commander Kelly, and we are in agreement with recommending method 3.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Likewise, I've met with the principal regarding method 3, and the department is good with utilizing method 3 moving forward.
All right,
Over.
thank you. I have also met with my principal and discussed method 3, and we are also all right with this one going forward. So thank you all so very much. Before we leave Appendix A, I just want to mention something that we're probably going to need to address really, really soon. We've all talked about the 333 North structure several times during the meeting today. So I think our next Appendix A equation adventure is going to be how we're going to deal with the 333 North for Shark River Slough. I'm hoping that's not going to be a huge issue, and I guess we need to decide if that structure, if we're able to, we may be able to complete construction and potentially use that structure more fruitfully between now and the next TOC meeting. So would we continue with it without the 333N going forward? Any thoughts there, comments?
Julie, this is Frank with the department. Could you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. You know, part of the Appendix A equation is for Shark River Slough, and we've all been talking about the 333 North structure, which we're hoping will come online very shortly and probably be used between now and the next quarterly TOC meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If that's something we need to track using that, doing the calculations with or without the 333 North going forward until this group decides what to do about that. Or you guys
Julie,
can
this
think,
is,
you know, you go ahead.
yeah, this is Dan Crawford. I agree. I think it's prudent to carry forward the with and without for the interim. My understanding of this Water Management District's permit modification request is essentially it will allow us to use 333 North as kind of first in the queue before 333 to release basically the same water that we would have otherwise released through 333. So there will be slightly, we are doing a TP measurement at the 333 North structure. So, based on the information presented today, there may be a slightly different upstream nutrient level, which optimistically we hopeful there is. But I think it would be prudent moving forward to keep both of them in the discussion. And I would just, throw it out there. I think this is the last round of Appendix A sub-team meetings has been very fruitful in terms of having this discussion about modifying the methods. And I would add, like with the 356 pump station, we did have a conversation about what monitoring data we needed to have to inform the TOC making the ultimate recommendation on how to incorporate 356 into Appendix A calculations. I think also on the table for the next Appendix A sub-team meeting, we should also start the conversation or re-engage on the conversation about how we're going to consider the SEP South Phase 1 structures, which we ought to, by the next quarter, we may very well have, the Corps of Engineers may very well have a construction schedule for those structures. Now, they're not going to be connected directly to Shark River Slough when they're completed, but we will have, and the Corps is proposing to install some temporary pumps on Tamiami Trail, very similar to the temporary pumps that were installed on 355 Bravo that John has included in some of his prior year calculations. So I would just, put a pin on the Appendix A sub-team that I think we carry forward with those discussions and start not only talking about 333 North, but also the L29 temporary pumps, and with kind of a intermediate forecast on the South features. And I just want to commend, John and Stuart and, Paul, all the federal sides who've participated in this discussion. I think it's been a very fruitful, collaborative effort from the Appendix A sub-team to get to this point. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comments from the reps as far as Appendix A equations and so forth? We'll kind of put this on our list for next.
So Julie, this is Frank, and I think it would be in the best interest, because what Dan was talking about just there's a lot going on with the L67 structures, and that the L67 structures will be delivering into a different conservation area 3B, which goes into a different regulation schedule. And the temporary pumps discussion, along with the whole construction timeline, potential operation of those potential structures, and with the operation and the construction design of the 333N. I don't think we've been briefed at a TOC perspective. I know we at an individual agency, we're all engaged on that, but at a TOC and for the public, I don't think everyone's been educated on that entire discussion there. So it may be like Dan was saying, it may be a good opportunity, since we still have the Appendix A sub-team, to make that maybe a discussion item there.
Okay.
Just a thought. Over.
All right, thank you. Okay, anything else from the reps before I go into some general public comments, if we have any more? I don't see anybody unmuted except for John. Are you done, John Madden, or did there something else you wanted to add?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm done unless you need anything else from me.
Okay. Oh, you've done great. I really appreciate the extra materials you put together. Thank you. All right. Let's go to some general public comment, if we have any additional public comments, and then we can go into some closing business and finish off our meeting. We do have some hands raised, so let me scroll back up to the raised hands here. First of all, I'd like to call on Greg Munson. And Greg, you are hopefully unmuted on both sides, ours and yours.
I don't see a microphone. There we go.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, we sure can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, this is Greg Munson at Gunster. And I'm really just following up the previous comments that I made at the last TOC meeting. And at the last TOC meeting, I was speaking about a comment letter that the district had made to the Army Corps prior to that TOC meeting. And I'm speaking now this time to address the district's subsequent comments about the same plan, but to the Florida State Clearinghouse in a new letter dated July 31st. And I specifically just wanted to comment on the portion of the letter related to Appendix A, since obviously that's been a major focus for this group. And the TOC seems to be making very significant technical progress today. So I'm really, I think, just speaking to highlight what I perceive to be the apparent disconnect between the district's July 31st letter from the progress and the presentations today. In the letter, and I think this is the part that probably requires some clarification, it says with regards to COP, the Corps should, quote unquote, engage state and federal parties to reconcile the goals of Appendix A with the goals of SERP. Not 100% sure what that means. It sounds a lot like the district is asking for a revision to Appendix A, which I believe is probably long overdue and would be an appropriate solution that has been long sought by the district. And as the July 31st letter itself notes, there is that inherent tension between SERP restoration flows and Appendix A. So such a change could be entirely justified. The only thing I think of the major concern is the apparent indication later in the letter where it says, in the meantime, is the apparent indication from that phrase, in the meantime, that the engagement of the Corps with the state and federal parties can occur after sending additional flows south under SERP. and therefore potentially occurring after a potential violation of Appendix A already occurs. So that engagement would occur after the potential violation, if I'm reading that correctly. Obviously, under the consent decree, it's not appropriate to beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. And so, you know, we would say Appendix A should be revised if that's what the district meant, and revised first. And that needs to consider the timing, all consider the timing of implementation of COP. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Next, we have someone whose phone number ends in 5372.
Yes, this is Drew Martin with the Sierra Club Loxahatchee group, and I just wanted to emphasize that I agree with Melanie Naja's comments from the Everglades Foundation, and I believe that you should pursue moving forward on dredging sediments out of the canals, since that did cause you to have a violation. And I think it's important where that dredging material goes, so to make sure it doesn't get back into the canals. So I think that's going to be an issue, but I'm sure when you analyze that, you will work that out. And I appreciate Donato's work, and I think he's done a great job. So, and then I really want to thank him for all his efforts.
Great, thank you very much, Drew. Next, for public comment, we have Melody Naja.
Yes, hey, Julie. This is Melody from the Everglades Foundation. I really congratulate the team, the sub-team, the Appendix A sub-team for reaching consensus and for presenting the two methodologies for calculating the long-term limits and a phosphorus flow-weighted mean for the park. That's really great. Just an observation, it will be really great if the principals and the TOC would open up the sub-team meetings, the Appendix A sub-team meetings for the public, for us to attend and to hear the discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Do I have any other public comment? I don't see any hands raised at the moment. I will give you guys a moment. That's right. You guys told me the hand raisers go to the top. I don't see any more folks wanting to make public comments. So I appreciate all of you hanging in there. We had 62 of you on here at one point, so I am grateful for everybody's participation. Let's do a quick recap of action items from this meeting. And Chris King, you may need to correct me, but I believe we're supposed to go back to our principals and talk about proposed, hopefully near-term remedies for the water year 2019 exceedance, and maybe not exclude other ideas that we have in addition to those that Donato put forward. And then the other item, which kind of punts us into the next meeting, is to maybe dually track the 333N and talk about SEP South and a little more about that for the next meeting. Do we have any other action items that came up today?
I'm just going to correct that one document, Julie. This is John Madden.
Thank you. Okay.
The method 1.5 and make sure that that's clear.
Okay, and John's going to correct that. We'll repost it. So, all right, great. Thank you. Folks, we have...
Donato is going to update one of the slides so that two slides so that water year 2012 is not represented as an exceedance.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. Okay, thanks. All right, and then our next quarterly meeting is tentatively scheduled for either October 27th or November 3rd. Did you guys have a preference of those dates?
This is Lori. The 27th is actually better for me, but if we need to do it on November 3rd, I can always make myself available.
Okay. What about everybody else?
Julie, this is Dan. I'm good with either date.
Donato's the same.
Okay.
Julie, this is Frank, and October 27th actually works better for me than November 3rd. Over.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Barquette?
I would say the 27th is probably better. Is November 3rd, is that election day?
Oh my gosh, it might be.
That's what it says on my calendar.
Yep, that's what it says on mine.
Yeah, so October 27th sounds good. They're both fine with me, of course. So, all right, great. So we'll plan for our next quarterly meeting to be October 27th. I do want to remind you, if there's a need to have a special meeting between now and then for some reason, we can make that happen. I would expect you guys to let us know so we could do that if that needs to be done. Okay, I think we have done enough business for today. Again, I really, really appreciate the healthy discussion and everybody's participation, and looking forward to making some good progress going forward. So thank you all very much. We will close this meeting.
I want to say I got a lot of praise for the presentation that I gave, but I did not do it alone. I had a whole team. So I want to make sure that everybody, recognizes that Donato didn't do all of this by himself. I want to thank Dan for input. I got Troy Hill, Jed Redwine, Bob Johnson, and a whole slot of other people. So wasn't Donato alone.
Okay, thanks a lot. And thanks to your team, Donato.
Hey, Julie.
Hi.
Hey, this is Lori. Just real quick. So I know we're trying, do we have a deadline set for the principals conversation? Is that like 2 weeks? And then how are we going to get back with each other? Are we going to do this through email? Do we have a path forward for that?
I think we agreed we're going to try to do it within a couple of weeks. And we don't really control our principal schedules, but if we could find out when the principal's meeting is, it seems like it would be a good idea to do it before then. And then I don't want to break any public meeting rules. Probably the best for our principals to get back to each of us and let us know what they decided.
Okay. And then what? Are we going to have a special meeting just to announce the decision, or is that something?
If the principals have decided something, I don't know that we need to have a special meeting for that.
Okay.
I think we could report back at the next TOC meeting.
Okay, so are we able then to at least have an email exchange so that we can start scheduling Appendix A if it's approved? Or are we waiting till after something to have the Appendix A sub-team start scheduling a meeting?
Back from our principals on that, and we can take it from there. And if, as you know, I get overly concerned about some of our discussions. I think we're about talking about logistics outside the sunshine, but worst case, we could have Violetta kind of run some interference for us there.
Okay, well, just let us know, just so we know what we're doing.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, if we don't have anything else, we'll close this out today. Thanks a lot, everybody. Really, really appreciate the wide participation.
Thank you, Julie.
Yep. Thanks all.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody.